All right, I'd like to call to order. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all on this beautiful fall morning. I'd like to call to order public meeting number 136 of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission. For those who are watching from afar, I'm told we are now streaming on both iPads and iPhones as well as computers, so all is right with the world. Commissioner Cameron is absent today on a commitment that she could not avoid because the first item on our agenda this morning concerns the land aspects of the Region A matter. Chairman Crosby is not participating in this segment. We'll have a brief pause after this first agenda item, and then he'll resume his customary position. So, the first item on the agenda this morning is a report from the Investigation and Enforcement Bureau. We have Director Karen Wells with us, the head of the State Police Detail, Detective Lieutenant Brian Connors, and Lieutenant Kevin Congdon with us this morning, and we're grateful to have you here to give us an update in light of the events of last week. Director Wells.
Yes, good morning, Commissioners. As I know you are all aware, last week, both the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General's Office announced indictments against 3 individuals associated with FBT Realty in Everett. Those individuals are Dustin D'Annunzio, Anthony Gattineri, and Charles Lightbody. As with any indictment, these are allegations which need to be proved beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. The state indictments include impeding a gaming investigation, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. The federal indictments include conspiracy, aiding and abetting, and wire fraud. In addition, the federal authorities have also moved for forfeiture of the proceeds derived from the alleged criminal conduct. I have asked the commanding officer of the Massachusetts State Police Gaming Enforcement Unit, Detective Lieutenant Brian Connors, to address the Commission regarding the investigation. I would once again like to compliment Detective Lieutenant Connors and his team, particularly Lieutenant Kevin Congdon from the State Police and Guy Michael and Robert Carroll from our consultant firm of Michael and Carroll for the fine investigative work they did on this issue. I am also grateful to the FBI, the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the Attorney General's Office for their efforts and collaboration in this matter. So I'll turn it over to Detective Lieutenant Connors to address the Commission.
Thank you, Director Wells. Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to speak to you here this morning. I'll try to keep my remarks brief, but I do want to hit on several points, specifically 3 main areas that I'll provide some details during my remarks this morning. The first area that I'd like to highlight, and this is from the IEB's perspective, is that the investigative process leading to these indictments worked, and it will continue to work. The second note is that the process worked, will continue to work in a large part due to the cooperative law enforcement efforts involving the State Police, the IEB, the FBI, the Department of Correction, the Attorney General's Office, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. And the final point, I'd like to highlight these specific roles of the IEB, not only in this investigation, but investigations in general, including the regulatory versus criminal investigative aspects of our duties. I believe that last point is critical to shed some light on just really what the function and roles are of each agency, particularly in an investigation of this nature. To that last point, during early July of 2013, the State Police assigned to the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau of the Massachusetts Gaming Commission received information from the Federal Bureau of Investigation relative to the suspected hidden interests of a convicted felon in the Everett land, which was the proposed site for the Wynn Casino. At that time, IEB investigators were in the midst of the suitability investigation pertaining to the Wynn Mass LLC application, which also included investigating the proposed land deal between the Wynn Mass LLC and members of the FBT Everett Realty LLC, the owners of the property. During the ensuing months, IEB investigators, led by Lieutenant Kevin Congdon, who is present with me today and seated to the left of Director Wells, furthered the IEB's regulatory investigation, which included gathering additional evidence. It's important to detail that the IEB's primary function is to conduct a regulatory suitability investigation, while any criminal matters uncovered during that process are referred to the Attorney General's Office or in this case, also the U.S. Attorney's Office. This framework has been put in place by statute and provides a blueprint for the IEB and the AGO's Division of Gaming Enforcement to operate from. It is important to note that there is a distinct line between the gathering of evidence from a regulatory standpoint versus the gathering of evidence in a criminal investigation. The limitations between the two and the accompanying legal requirements are to be strictly adhered to. This distinction is one that the IEB and our state and federal counterparts took very seriously and maintained throughout this investigation, and will continue to do so going forward. The separation of functionality is critical to the integrity of both the regulatory investigation being conducted by the IEB and the criminal investigation being conducted by the Attorney General's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office. As far back as December 13, 2013, during the Commission's public meeting, and prior to a summary of the investigation by the Investigation Enforcement Bureau to the Commission, IEB Director Wells prefaced her presentation to the Commission by stating, quote, "Information sharing, particularly between different law enforcement agencies, is critical to ongoing success," end quote. I highlight those words by Director Wells because it is just that level of cooperation that has led the investigation to this point, from the initial information received by the state police and the IEB from the FBI, to the IEB making the required referrals to the Gaming Enforcement Division of the Attorney General's Office, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office. The regulatory and criminal investigative process in place was expected to work, it has worked, and it will continue to work. During that same public meeting on December 13, 2013, Director Wells also provided the details of the IEB's investigation to that point, including the circumstances surrounding the land purchase of the current WinMass LLC site and the suspected criminal wrongdoing of the part of a number of individuals. Specifically, Director Wells informed the Commission at that time, again I quote, "Evidence exists to suspect that Charles Lightbody, a convicted felon, may have retained an interest in the Everett property, and well after the applicant, Wynn, had been advised that he had been removed," end quote. The IEB was well aware of the fact pattern as a result of our investigation to that point, and had been so informed since early July of 2013. It was also during that same public meeting that Commissioner McHugh indicated that the IEB should, quote, "refer everything that we've got to the appropriate law enforcement authorities, the U.S. Attorney, the District Attorney, and the Attorney General," end quote. That is exactly what the IEB did with the evidence gathered to that point, and which ultimately assisted in obtaining the previously detailed indictments obtained by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General's Office. The investigative process worked. Since that December 13, 2013 public meeting, Director Wells has continued to update the Commission as to the status of the WinMass LLC application process and ongoing IEB suitability investigation. It is important to note once again that the IEB's ongoing suitability investigation at that point was separate and distinct from the investigations being conducted by the Attorney General's Office and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Again, it was absolutely critical that the regulatory and criminal investigations remain separate and distinct. It is important to point out that the suitability of any applicant or licensee is an ongoing process, either during the application phase or after licensure. Suitability is a continuous process. On May 2, 2014, Director Wells updated the Commission by informing them in part that, quote, "the IEB continues to follow through on obtaining relevant information regarding the sellers of that property," end quote. Most recently, on September 8, 2014, Director Wells again addressed the Commission, providing them with a suitability update regarding the WinMass LLC application, as well as an update relative to the IEB's investigation of FBT Everett Realty LLC, which included a summary of additional information that the IEB obtained since the suitability hearing. This information was also turned over to state and federal authorities. On that date, Director Wells also provided information to the Commission that the IEB had uncovered no additional information that Wynn personnel had knowledge of or participating in any efforts to conceal any information from the Commission. That status remains to this date. In closing, I would like to state that these state and federal indictments, as outlined by Director Wells, generally provide us with facts that were consistent with the IEB's investigation at the time the evidence was referred to state and federal authorities in 2013. The ensuing state and federal investigations corroborated much of what the IEB learned during our own investigation. Going forward, I believe that these cooperative efforts and the results to this date clearly demonstrate that the Massachusetts Gaming Commission and the citizens of the Commonwealth can have full confidence in the state police, the IEB, and our state and federal counterparts. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'll turn it back over to Director Wells for additional remarks.
Thank you, Detective Lieutenant.
Thank you
Director
very
Wells.
much, Detective Lieutenant Connors. I'd also like to add, as I reported to the Commission during the suitability update on September 8th of 2014, we have confirmed with Wynn that the individuals who were indicted last week will have no involvement in the casino operations going forward. I think it's important for the public to understand that being honest and forthright with the Commission is of paramount importance. With that in mind, I do have a message as we go forward in this process that I would like to read into the record. As we move forward with the implementation of the Expanded Gaming Act in Massachusetts, the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau will not only be continually monitoring the suitability of licensees, but we will also be investigating potential vendors and employees, as well as applicants for Region C. The events of last week underscore the continuing validity of the principles of integrity and honesty, which are the cornerstone of our investigations. As such, I have 3 pieces of advice for individuals who we come across during these investigations. Piece of advice number 1, do not lie to Commission investigators. It would be foolish to assume that we will not figure it out. Our track record speaks for itself. My second piece of advice, do not lie to Commission investigators. Honesty is the best policy. If there is a problematic issue, the Commission will work to see if there is a fair and reasonable solution. And not surprisingly, my third piece of advice is do not lie to Commission investigators. Lying to Commission investigators is a crime, and we will refer concerns to state and federal criminal law enforcement authorities. The role of these authorities is to proceed with a criminal investigation where appropriate, and make no mistake, they will. So we are certainly happy to answer any questions that the Commission has at this time regarding these matters.
Colleagues? Well, let me just come back and look at the distinction. Ask a question of you, Director Wells, about the distinction between regulatory investigations and criminal investigations that Detective Lieutenant Connors talked about. I take it that distinction not only lives in the statute, but also is consistent with a fairly well-defined case law, judicial distinction between rights that parties have and rights that the state has when we're dealing with a regulatory investigation as opposed to a criminal investigation.
That is absolutely correct.
And it's important to keep that distinction firmly in place in order to assure that individuals have their constitutional rights, but also in the regulatory arena that the Commission has freedom to act and act broadly to preserve the public interest.
That's correct.
It seems to me that unless others have questions, that the bottom line on this, my takeaway from both the report that we received today and looking at the indictments themselves, it really falls into 4 related parts. The first is that the Investigation and Enforcement Bureau's investigation concluded, and the indictments reflect that the Wynn applicant had no role in any wrongdoing by the owners of the land and had no knowledge of that wrongdoing before the investigation was completed or at least commenced. Secondly, that the FBT sellers and the personnel involved in that company will have no ongoing involvement with Wynn operations when Wynn operations begin. In fact, have no ongoing involvement with the Wynn applicant once the land sale is consummated shortly after the license is awarded. And the third of those is that if any lies are proved, and if those lies led to the receipt by FBT members of money, then under the federal indictment, that money is subject to forfeiture to the federal government. And finally, if there were lies, but those lies did not lead to the receipt of money, then the people who told the lies still face substantial prison terms, a possibility thereof, for lying, regardless of whether or not the lies produced money. So it seems to me that the integrity of the system did work and has worked and continues to work. Now, we got a letter yesterday from Attorney Charles Baker of DLA Piper that talked about some of these same things. I got that letter I got it at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon and have only had a chance to look at it briefly, but it seems to me on that brief first glance that there's nothing inconsistent with what we've just discussed here today in that letter. But we will, of course, as we do, give everything careful consideration and in due course. But it's important to understand that in addition to the report that we've received today and the prospect of future reports, because suitability is a continuing obligation and responsibility of the Gaming Commission and will be adhered to. The Gaming Commission as a whole is going to monitor carefully the progress of this applicant's movement toward operations, toward opening, just as it is today monitoring the movement toward operation and opening of MGM and Penn National. We're having 30-day reports. We're having conferences. We've got a consultant who's overseeing their operations, and we'll continue to monitor activities as they proceed and make adjustments if and to the extent necessary in the conditions that we've set out as circumstances revealed by that monitoring warrant. We've already made adjustments. We've already requested and demanded changes to various plans in the ongoing operations of our licensee and licensee designate, and we'll continue to do that here. So that, it seems to me, is where the matter stands now. Indeed, the first presentation by WIN, the first requirement that they appear and give us a report, is in simply a few weeks away, and so we'll have a better a chance to see how that plays out then. So that's my view and synopsis of where we are today. I welcome any additional thoughts from my colleagues. Commissioner Zuniga?
Sure. I'm in full agreement with your summary. I thank you for the presentation and the emphasis on how it's distinct to think about the regulatory investigation and the criminal investigation. I think that's key for us to understand, for our audience to understand and appreciate. It's clear that you started with this process more than a year ago, and you took the regulatory investigation as far as you could. And at that time, you turned over to the appropriate criminal law enforcement authorities, and they have taken action. And I think this reflects very much what you suspected. And your 3 pieces of advice that could be essentially 1 piece of advice should not go unnoticed by anybody who's watching, because that itself is an offense that might be punished with prison sentence. So I also want to emphasize, as it's been said here, I'm comforted that your thorough and detailed investigation did not uncover any role of the WIN applicant in the effort to conceal this ownership. And I think that also speaks volumes relative to the process. So thank you for the update, and thank you for the work you do.
Yeah, I would just echo what my colleagues said. I think one of the key words that stuck out for me in this presentation, I think, was by the detective lieutenant saying that the investigative process worked. And I think it's helpful for people to understand, again, from this presentation, that the IEB is a new creature created out of the gaming statute with assigned responsibilities and authorities and powers. And again, I also think that it worked, and as it's been raised here before, suitability is an ongoing process. We know that in the coming months, we'll have new qualifiers who are currently being reviewed by the IEB, so it's not just once you get a license or designated for a license, that the suitability test ends there. I do have a question for Director Wells, and it's just more of a reflective comment because I know she's been on the other side of the equation on the prosecution side of this, but if you can just lend any insight or experience, having been on that side of the equation, and where you sit now, some of the compelling differences between the two.
Well, in the regulatory investigation, I'd say we, in some ways, have an advantage because the individuals who are coming to be licensed, so an individual that is wants an employee license or a vendor license or as a qualifier, they have to fill out forms. They have to.
Director, would you pull the
Yeah,
microphone?
they have to fill out forms. They have to answer questions, so that it is an advantage for us because they are looking for something from us, and if they want to get the license, they're compelled to provide whatever we ask of them, and it's an effective tool to get information to have that power. You know, on the criminal investigatory side, you know, generally tools such as search warrants, wiretap warrants, immunization of witnesses, proffer agreements, witness cooperation agreements. Those are some of the tools that that on the criminal side that may be effective in investigation. So it's a different, it's different, although we do have a state police unit that's working with us who are experienced criminal investigators, and we may use, you know, some methods going forward, but generally we are looking at things from a regulatory perspective. Can we license them? What is the analysis of prospectively of can we affirmatively find that they will be okay going forward? Whereas in the criminal investigation, they're looking for evidence of misconduct. So it's a different intellectual analysis, and it's a little different in some of the tools that we use and some of the powers that we have.
I would also just reflect on the comments of the fact that, you know, we hear oftentimes that government agencies don't talk to each other, and this is certainly a fine example of where government agency cooperation between federal and state authorities, I think, assisted us, and the work of the IEB assisted them in return. So that's to be complimented, and hopefully something that we can continue to appreciate as this process goes forward.
Thank you.
All right, I think that does it. Thank you all three for your help, prior work, and your report today. We're going to take a brief recess now, and then we will reconvene with the 4 members who are present today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we are ready to reconvene. If I can have your attention, please, everybody back there. We're reconvening public meeting number 136 on October 9th at the Convention Center. And we will go to item number 2 on the agenda, which was the approval of minutes, which I believe have been withdrawn. Commissioner McHugh, are you?
Yes, the minutes are not the minutes of the they're the minutes of the licensing hearings, and they're not ready yet. So we'll get to them.
That's
promptly.
the whole long Region 8.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Region A minutes. Yeah.
Okay, great. Then to item number 4, Workforce Supplier and Diversity Development. Jill Griffin, our Director. I pass the ball to you.
Great. I don't think it's on. Good morning, Chairman Crosby and Commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Commissioners, with the construction of the large Category 1 casinos ahead of us, we have been focused on learning from construction projects with successful records of diversity achievement so that we may apply those lessons. As you all know, this is a major goal in the legislation as well. The project, you see on the screen the article from the Boston Herald in August of 2014. And this is an article that has been reprinted hundreds of times across the country. It really highlights the importance of the issue of getting women into the construction trades and the interest of women in this career. I have been talking with folks about those successful construction projects. The one project that kept coming up again and again was the Division of Capital Asset Management's UMass Integrated Science Complex. I reached out to Andrea Lang, Director of Compliance for DCAM. I spoke to Ron Marlowe from the Commonwealth. Commissioner Stebbins and I met with Brian Doherty of the Building and Construction Trades Council of the Metropolitan District, and Mark Ehrlich from the New England Regional Council of Carpenters. We've talked with Lou Finfer from the Massachusetts Community Action Network, MCAN, and Weezy Wallstein from the Action for Regional Equity, just to name a few. All of these folks were involved in an Access and Opportunity Committee that monitored diversity progress on this 3-year construction project. Project owners, UMass and developer DCAM set aggressive participation goals for minority individuals, women, veteran, and city residents. The city resident goal was 50%. Veteran goal was 6%, minority goal 25%, and women goal, last but not least certainly, was 10%. So in addition to meeting and surpassing these diversity goals, what was even more incredible to me was that the owners, developers, unions, and community all pointed to the best practices utilized during this project. We were pointed to the work of Susan Moyer and Liz Skidmore from the Policy Group on Tradeswomen's Issues, who gathered these best practices for sharing with others. Chairman Crosby and I had the pleasure of meeting with Susan and Liz in a learning session set up by Pink & Company, our Category 2 construction monitor. We thought it was worth bringing a high-level overview to share with the Commission, our licensees, their contractors, and potential contractors. So I'd like to introduce Liz Skidmore, Business Manager of the New England Regional Council of Carpenters, and Susan Moyer, Director of UMass Boston Labor Resource Center. Take it away.
Good morning.
Good morning. Before our guests begin, let me just mention real quick that Ms. Moyer, her kids and my kids share the same wonderful piano teacher. I just wanted to make that disclosure.
Dave of Roslindale.
Dave of Rossendale, yeah.
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure, thank you.
Full transparency, that's great.
I never thought of that.
We may have a recital. But
Right.
Well, we've been to a couple and they're wonderful too.
Next commissioner meeting. Well, I'm Liz Skidmore. Thank you, commissioners, for having us here. We're excited to be part of this process and to share what we've been learning of the work we've been doing. First, I have been a carpenter for 25 years. I worked in the field for about 10 and have worked for the union, for the Carpenters Union, for about 15. And as I like to say, my part-time unpaid side job for 25 years has been getting more women into the union. It's been a great career for me. I was able to buy a house as a young woman. I've been able to be independent and have had health insurance for 25 years, which just isn't the case for an awful lot of workers in the state. And have a pension to look forward to, which isn't the case for many workers anywhere in the country, because I'm a member of a union. I've done many things to get more women into the union, and I've learned from all of them, but about 6 years ago, I realized that even though I and many others across the country have worked hard to get more women in, essentially our movement had failed. We were at about 2% in the late 80s, and we're at 2 to 3% now. And there have been many individual successes that are important, but we haven't really moved things. So I went to Susan and said, can we get the smartest people together that we know who care about this and see if we can't do more than work hard and not accomplish enough? And so over the last 6 years, I think we've changed things and gotten off, as I like to say, off the hamster wheel, and are actually affecting change. The percentage of women hours working in Boston over the last 3 years has almost doubled. It's still not high enough, but we're seeing the effects of the work that we've been doing. And that's not just because of the boom, because it's a percentage of the total hours working. So we started this group that we came to call the Policy Group on Tradeswomen's Issues, to try to see if we couldn't figure out a more policy level changes that needed to happen. And it's the first time in my 25 years of trying to do this work that we had a really diverse group of stakeholders in the room. So we've had city, state, and federal government officials, we've had contractors, we've had subcontractors, we've had union officials, we've had tradeswomen, we've had academics. And each person, turns out, had a great deal of expertise in one little silo, but none of us had talked together. And it's that regional partnership together over time that is one of the fundamental pieces of changing this industry and making it work better. And so we've been meeting every other month for 6 years now. And the Access and Opportunity Committee that Jill mentioned is a similar, it turns out there's sort of several groups happening like that, that is bringing all the right people together to work past the sort of yelling at each other about not doing it in the past and get into the problem solution. One of the key things that is changing what has happened in the past to try to get more women into the trades, for many, many years, almost all the focus for women in the trades was on recruitment and training. We want more women, oh, let's go recruit them, and then let's do pre-apprenticeship, let's train them. It turns out that's a critical piece of the puzzle, but by itself, it's not enough. It's been a failed strategy. And this goes back to basic economics. That's the supply, but we needed to do the demand. And it's turned out that doing compliance, getting compliance working, creates the demand, which then puts pressure on the supply. Because if you're recruiting and training women that don't find employment opportunities, they leave. And that's what's happened. We've brought many, many women in over the last 30 years, but they haven't stayed because there hasn't been enough employment opportunities. So by bringing supply and demand together, it seems to be making a critical difference. So just brief history, 80s women were under 3% of the workforce. The federal goal was 6.9%. That is the current federal law. Any job with federal funding is supposed to have 6.9%. In 1986, the city of Boston established a goal of 10% for women, along with 25% for people of color and 50% for Boston residents. And yet, in spite of that, and a couple years ago, the state established a goal of 6.9% in Bolton 14, but we're still just at 2.6% of the workforce. So it's this compliance piece and getting the stakeholders all together that needs to happen in a bigger way, and I think the opportunity to do that on these projects exists. So why do we care? I mean, women in construction is kind of a sexy topic for some people. It's kind of fun, but it actually has a much bigger impact than that. You know, occupational segregation, you guys, I'm sure, have seen this all over the place, that, you know, women are clustered in the lowest paying jobs in the economy, and yet often have larger financial responsibilities, often are the single head of households. And so when you can find ways to make women or allow women to have access to jobs that are actually family-sustaining careers, you change those children's lives, you change that family's lives, you change the community. It has a very large multiplier. Also, the industry has a labor shortage, you know, and we're, you know, as Susan said, we're running out of the young white guys to do this. They just don't want to do this. They want to do other things, and that's their right. But you know, this idea that we have in this culture that women can't do heavy physical work is just not true. We've been learning about tradeswomen in other countries, and there are many, many women in construction in other countries. So there's sort of a cultural idea, but it's not the case. And this is a good career. And there's plenty of women who don't want to sit behind a desk, just as there are plenty of men who don't want to. And diversity is a market share driver. The contractors who really take this on because we're getting more and more, the compliance tools working better and better, those contractors who build a diverse core crew are going to grow their market share. They're going to have access. They can show a successful track record. There are now general contractors who are looking at that when subcontractors bid to them. What will not work is sort of a long-standing industry practice of just kind of winking at the law. The law is there. Everyone's used to ignoring it. Everyone kind of goes through the motions. Nothing happens. It's my sense from our contact so far that that is not your intention, and we certainly applaud that. Now, one critical difference that people new to this topic don't always think of, this is very separate from the issue of WBEs and MBE, women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. That is not our focus. And we did an analysis of millions of hours done on the Big Dig, and it's the biggest data set we've ever had, and it turns out that WBEs actually hire less tradeswomen than either MBEs or majority-owned contractors. So
WBEs hire fewer women tradespeople
yes,
than either MBEs or other contractors.
correct.
It's weird.
Isn't it?
It is weird, although my opinion about that is there's the sexism is so intense that if you're already a woman-owned business and if your crew is all women, that just the fear of not getting taken seriously by anybody is there. And so I think there's sort of an overcompensation that can happen. But that could be food for more research for somebody to figure out. That's just my theory about it. And the other thing that won't work is sort of the scarecrow thing that happens where everyone's pointing at, oh, it's the unions, oh, it's the apprenticeship, oh, it's the general, oh, it's the subcontractor, oh, it's the compliance officers. Everyone pointing arrows at someone else and waiting for someone else to do it. What we found is when the owner is serious about this, which is what happened at the Integrated Science Center, real things can happen. And so this is one of the things the policy group has done is we have kept charts, and these are on our website, which we'll show you later, of the jobs that we've targeted to not only show when we have our weekly or our regular, they've been different frequency, regular Access and Opportunity Committee, not only what are our numbers right that day, but are we trending up or are we trending down? And you can see on this chart, and this is, I think it's about a $120 million project. We were at or above 10% for the women, the whole project. And to my knowledge, this is the first job in the history of the Boston Residents' Jobs Policy that's ever happened on. And so this is a very, very big deal to us. When I worked in the field, I was almost always the only woman everywhere I went. And it's that by itself, if nothing else happened, can be exhausting and can drive people out. And when you get to be on a job with other tradeswomen, it's really transformative and helps retention. Now, one of our little sayings is there is no silver bullet. So that this isn't an impossible thing, but if it was simple, it would have been solved already. And the truth is there's it's a complex social problem. There's many pieces of the solution. I've been part of a women's committee in the Carpenters Union for 15 years. We're actually about to have our 4th International Carpenters Women's Conference in January. And a recent project for the Women's Committee here in Boston was to do an outreach video. Work has been picking up. We know we need more women. So this is a 3-minute video that we just released about 2 weeks ago. It's already been seen by 3,057 people and has been shared by almost 50,000 people on Facebook. So it's quick, but we hope you'll enjoy it.
I built that.
I built this.
I built that.
I built this.
And I built that. I built that.
And I built this.
I built that right behind me. I built this right here. And you can be building all those that's coming up right there. I am a union carpenter. I'm a carpenter.
I am a union carpenter. I am a carpenter.
I'm in the carpenters union. I'm a carpenter.
I'm a carpenter.
I'm a carpenter local 33 out of Boston.
I'm a retired carpenter.
I'm a journey level carpenter.
I'm a 4A apprentice.
I'm a 1B apprentice.
I'm a journey level carpenter student.
I am a journeyman carpenter, 17 years in.
I'm a journey person.
I am a journeyman / woman.
I am a mother.
I am a grandmother of 3.
I'm a granddaughter.
I am a daughter.
I am married.
I'm single.
I have a wife.
I'm a widower.
I am a high school dropout.
I'm working on a degree at Wentworth.
I have my real estate license.
I'm a college graduate with a degree in business.
I've mentored a lot of girls.
I'm an inventor and I'm a caricature artist.
I am a boat builder and an organic gardener.
I like being out, being a part of something new, creative.
I like to work in my job.
I like to cook. I like to travel.
And I love problem solving. I enjoy working outdoors.
I work in the frigid. I work in the heat.
I like having a good reason to wake up early.
I love the bird's eye view. It's beautiful.
I loved working outside and being independent.
I like breaking stereotypes.
A woman can do this job just as well as a man.
It's a great opportunity to finally make the same amount of money as a man does.
I'm here to hold my own weight and do the job.
I like the progress of the job. Being in the union has helped me buy my first home.
I like that the union supports American-made goods.
I like that the union protects good jobs.
There's great benefits for life.
You have representation, you have support. What I like about the union is the feeling of closeness, family.
I like being in the union, the training that we get.
Being a carpenter is an honor.
I am proud to be a union carpenter. I'm very proud to be a carpenter. It's the best thing I could have ever did with my life.
I think it's one of the most useful trades you can know.
I wouldn't give it up for anything. I love it. I'm proud.
If you like a challenge, if you like a good day's work, then you'll enjoy working as a carpenter on our team. We want you, we need you.
It could be a career.
If you are creative in details, carpentry would be the perfect job for you.
All you young ladies out there that are interested in getting into the trade, be it carpentry or whichever, come on out.
Come see if this is the career for you.
You can earn a great wage, and don't let your fears of heights or not knowing anything about construction. When I got in, I couldn't even read and tape measures, so we want you.
I would like to encourage women to come out and be in the field of carpentry. So upgrade your life. Come and join us.
Everybody's looking for a good carpenter.
We need you. It's always a good time. The work is good. And there's plenty of it. So come and get it.
Thank you. And I just realized I was remiss in not mentioning the co-conveners of the policy group where we figured a lot of this out are Brian Doherty, who's the head of the Boston Building Trades, and Janet Jones, who's here, who's with the Dorchester-Roxbury Labor Committee, and who really had a lot of the on-the-ground experience developed from the Kroc Center, which was one of the early projects that didn't do great on women, but did better than many on hiring people of color and residents. So I wanted to mention those two and pass it on to Susan.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, commissioners, for inviting us. We very much appreciate this opportunity. So I'm the technician here. As Liz said, we have, over the last 6 years, almost 7 years, developed the tools, proven tools, for creating diversity on a construction site. We're here to talk about women in construction. I want to say briefly at this moment, but we say it many, many times, driving women into the industry drives diversity at all levels. And we have proven that. If we diversify by race and ethnicity, it does not do anything for women. But if we do diversify by women, it diversifies also by race and ethnicity. You can see from the video, it's women of color who are going into this industry. That in itself is a very positive element. So implementation, really what we've come to show you is how to follow the law and change an industry. And so 5 elements that we would say, we'll get more into the details of this, are necessary to do this. The elements that were shown by DCAM and UMass Building Authority at UMass Boston, the political will to do it makes a huge difference. As Liz said, we've been trying to do it for years and nothing has really changed. It really takes leadership and political will. Enforcement from the top and compliance from the bottom, and those are 2 different things. It may be a little technical, but they really are different. Enforcement is by the authority from above. Compliance is by those who are responsible for it from the bottom. Both things have to happen in order to change the industry. And all partners participating in ongoing monitoring committees. That's the example of PGTI. That's the example of the Access and Opportunities Committee. That's the example of the Kroc Center in Dorchester 4 years ago. And recognizing that diversity is a cost of doing business, I was presenting to a group a couple of weeks ago, and someone from a union training program actually turned and said, well, that's going to cost us money. And I said, yes, that's going to cost you money. Like everything else costs money, diversity costs money. This is a slide that I've been using for years. Obviously, a fairly typical business slide of any industry, but I think the hierarchy in any industry. But what you can see from this is that construction, there are many, many levels of the industry. And really what we're going to say that every level has a role in changing the industry and implementing diversity. I wanted to speak specifically about the role of the commission. Go on this one. No, not that one, the next one. Not that one, the next one, yeah. The role of the commission, your authority and responsibility regarding diversity in on the construction sites. So I'm not a lawyer, but I have, as part of this job for a long time, interpreted regulations and laws on this, because this is a matter of interpretation. I think that it was very interesting, Commissioner McHugh, what you said in the earlier presentation, in the presentation from the Investigation and Enforcement Bureau, when you noted that the Commission's role is to monitor right through the opening of the casinos. And you use the term monitoring warrant. I don't think that this is any different. Diversity on these construction sites is really no different from the question of criminal activity, from the question of quality of construction, from any questions regarding these projects. And I think that your own regulations demonstrate that. Your regulations, 205 CMR 132.02, Section 3, says the licensee shall provide an affirmative action plan to you, etc. And that regulation refers to ANF Bulletin 14, which is, kind of a conceptual, visionary document, but says processes and procedures to ensure compliance. And I have excerpted, not trying to distort anything, but just excerpted the sections on workforce participation. Processes and procedures to ensure compliance with workforce participation goals will be instituted. That document then refers to Supplemental Equal Employment Opportunity Non-Discrimination Affirmative Action Program, the supplement, which is very specific. Goals, monitoring, reports, subcontract notification, and sanctions. Your regulations refer all the way down to these, and I would contend and hope that you will have this discussion of your responsibility and authority as part of that larger hierarchy. Can you go up one slide for me for a second? Again, to reiterate, goals, reporting, intensive monitoring, notification of subcontractors and sanctions, and all of these are mentioned in your own governing regulations. And you can skip down 2 for me again. So these are the 5 requirements. That goal is 6.9% for women. The monitoring is very interesting because the actual language in those regulations, right through that supplemental document, there will be established for the life of a contract a body known as the Liaison Committee. We don't have the standard name for this anymore. Sometimes it's called the Monitoring Committee, sometimes it's called the Oversight Committee. The Division of Capital Asset Management and Maintenance has called it the Access and Opportunity Committee. In your regulation, there's a Liaison Committee. It's the same committee. It's a multi-stakeholder, long-standing collaboration to look at diversity issues. Your regulations call for reporting weekly reports on the numbers of hours worked by all employees, requires subcontractor notification. I'll have more to say on that, of their obligations, and gives the option of sanctions. we have developed a document which is called Finishing the Job. It's on our website. We'll show you that link. And that is a checklist, a series of checklists that for each of those multiple layers of the industry, the developers, the contractors, the subcontractors, the unions, and the community groups. We're actually just in the process of developing one with the State Apprenticeship Council for all apprentice and training programs. That's going to be recommended to the next meeting of the State Apprenticeship Council. So these checklists take what's in fine print, what's in complex legal language, what's buried in a lot of documents, and put it into a simple form that at each level, the folks who are responsible at that level can check off and say, I've done this, and if I haven't done it, I'm probably not going to be successful in getting women in this industry. So in our best practices checklist for the developers, which is somewhere between you and licensees, right? Legally, it may be the licensees, but it's for the commission and the licensees to figure out where that responsibility and authority lies. Put the goals up front and prominent in all bid documents. We say put it in, 16-point type, bold, right at the beginning of the document. As Liz alluded to the industry practice of winking, these goals are often at the very end, buried in all bid documents. Nobody pays any attention to them. That contributes to winking. Communicate with the CMs and the construction managers and the general contractors that maximum efforts are required. And then those processes and procedures that are referenced in ANF 14, we developed that specific checklist for what those processes and procedures need to be in order to ensure compliance. Pre-construction meetings at all stages, daily and weekly reporting, budgeting for compliance, on-site compliance officers. Danielle Stellig is here, has spent time as an on-site compliance officer at one of the UMass sites. She goes to every single subcontractor every week or every day to see what their numbers are. Constant, continuous monitoring. Multi-stakeholder project monitoring committee, again, whatever that is called. And this is a suggestion that you implement. Some have implemented. Bond Brothers at UMass Boston has actually implemented this, and Turner Construction is using it. Ask your subcontractors to include diversity histories in their bids. It's not required by law, but you have the right to ask them to include the diversity histories. Actually, Turner is going out and looking at the diversity histories, at some of the online data that we've developed, in order to vet their subcontractors. We can give you the names of some of the really bad actors, because we've seen them at UMass Boston. A best practice for reporting online transparent data, searchable data. This is an example of the data that is being used by DCAM and UMBA. And on the Boston Project Labor Agreement site. I could take you aside and in 2 minutes show you the diversity history of any contractor or any trade on the UMass Boston site, because we can look it up like that. You don't have to call me to get it. You don't have to call somebody in DCAM. You can look it up. It's all there, and it's transparent. All data now on the Boston Resident Jobs Policy is on data. It's not in the searchable site. We want it to be is online. It's not the data in the searchable way we want it to be, but it's all online. You can look up any contractor's history in Boston. All union and non-union apprenticeship data is now online. We are working at many different levels to make all the data transparent online, so nobody has to figure out or guess what the data is that they need. Again, I show you this just to remind you again, but one more slide. Actually, this is the construction industry hierarchy. There are two hierarchies. There is a management hierarchy, and there is a labor hierarchy under this, at least in the unionized sector. Where the rubber meets the road is at the subcontractors. The subcontractors are the ones who actually do the hiring. And it is our experience that project labor agreements are the most effective way. We can prove this, actually. It's not just our experience, but we have the data to show that project labor agreements are the most effective way to bring about diversity and definitely to improve women's numbers. Because the unions are bringing women into the apprenticeship programs, that subcontractor who's a signatory contractor can go to an actual pool and say, I need women on this job. I need people of color on this job. But this is where it happens, and this is very tricky, because the subcontractors, I come from a very radical background, and let me tell you, I want to believe that workers are the most vulnerable section of this industry. Subcontractors are the most economically and financially vulnerable sector of this industry. They are very marginal. If they don't get paid for a couple of weeks, they can go under, not make payroll. I've seen it over and over again. If a subcontractor bids on a job, and then that general contractor comes to them 3 weeks later and says, I'm going to be serious about diversity, that subcontractor is already in trouble, because that subcontractor's processes and procedures are not in place, and now he or she has to budget for that. We have to get to the subcontractors way back in the pipeline in order to be successful at this. And best practices for notification, again, no one's winking this time, right up front, 6.9% women's hours by trade from day one. If a subcontractor comes in with their core crew, and that's all white men, and they work for 6 weeks, their job may be no more than 4 months. They will never meet your goals. It has to be 6.9% and the minority figure from day one. Core crews are no excuse for noncompliance. This will be the biggest excuse you will see. I'm going to bring them in, but I got my core crew. These guys have been working me for a long time. Well, as Elizabeth said, people need to go to work. The women and the minorities are going into this industry. They need to be working on core crews. Core crews of all white men are no excuse in the law, and they should not be on any of your sites for noncompliance.
Susan, is core crew, is it just an informal expression, or
Yeah.
are there's not some kind of a contractual relationship?
No.
Okay.
No.
So it just sort of means my guys.
It's my guys,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly, Commissioner.
And they can move, that's up to them. They can make people members of their, quote, core crew.
Absolutely. And what we don't want to do is see a core crew come on. I'm the subcontractor, I bring the 4 of you on. And then 2 weeks later, the general comes along and says, no, you have to have a woman on that crew, and Commissioner McHugh gets fired. That will make for...
get fired. I had a question, though. You've referred now twice, once in a slide to we're having a shortage of white men, and you just referred to, again, a core crew of white men. What about African-American men as well as women? What about Hispanic men as well as women? Is that factor into this calculus at all?
Yes, absolutely. As I said just a few minutes ago, we can actually show you the data to show that moving more women into this industry diversifies the whole industry by race also. We can actually show you that data. But what doesn't happen is you diversify. In Boston right now, we're very successful at diversity. We should have 50% minorities working in construction in Boston right now, because the population of Boston is 50% minorities. But we don't. But we do have 33%. A third of our industry in Boston right now is minorities, people of color. But we're still around 3, 4, 5% women. We have pushed the minority, and believe me, the policy group on tradeswomen's issues has strong alliances with those whose primary focus is on minorities. We have very strong alliances. But we can prove it. If you diversify by pushing more women into the industry, you diversify by race. But my point on this was, we don't want to, believe me, there have been times in the tradeswomen movement where people have said, you've got to fire the guy and you've got to bring a woman on. We don't want that to happen. We don't want the non-diverse crews to go on site and then have someone removed. We faced this in the very first weeks of UMass Boston. That will create horrible feelings. The woman who replaces the person who's laid off, that was your buddy. You're not going to be friends with that person. It creates horrible poison on the site. And construction sites are a very intimate workplace. This is why it's so important for this to happen long before the shovel hits the ground, long before the boots hit the site, so that diversity is happening long before we get on site.
I just want to make one observation relative to Commissioner McHugh's question. Although this is a process that's been designed by a group that's been dedicated to try to get women in the construction trades, there is no question that these best practices that they're talking about are totally applicable for any other kind, so we will use these strategies not just to get women into the trades, but to get minorities into the trades, and it's also same basic concepts of what what makes change is applicable to supplier diversity as well. So,
Yeah.
So we're taking your principles as broadly applicable to other such objectives.
Thank you, because, and they are. I think that when Liz was talking about the 10% women on the UMass site, the goal for minorities on the UMass site is 25%. The integrated sciences complex is 31%. It's all part of the same thing. But as I say, what's not true, what's clearly not true, is if we talk about diversity and we don't talk about women. Janet Jones is here from the Dorchester-Roxbury Labor Committee, and I think she can testify to the failure at the Croc was to talk about diversity without talking about women. And it was an eye-opening failure because it just didn't happen. I'll go one more. I just got a couple more slides, I think. I just wanted to just say that in 6.5 years, we have created a lot of product. There's a lot of information here for you. We advocate not reinventing. We give away everything we do and only ask that there be a small attribution. This was contributed, the Policy Group on Tradeswomen's Issues contributed to these efforts. If you'll click on the link below for me, all of these materials are online in Word format. Contractors can be given the document and tell them, take out what you need, take out what works for you, put your letterhead on it, use anything that we've done. So these are some of the documents we produced. All the workforce participation data is here. Finishing the Job, which is the best practices document. Unfinished Business was our founding document. If you scroll down for a second, go up, scroll down, go up, yeah. Our targeted projects right here has data on all the projects we've been following, not only UMass Boston, but Tropical Foods in Dudley, the development of Jackson Square,
Ferdinand.
and the Ferdinand Building in Dudley. So we thank you, and we're available for questions, comments, and any assistance we can provide over the life of your existence.
Thank you.
Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, you mentioned you made a couple of references to looking at the history of bids, which I think it's right on point, and the point about the subcontractors' history and where the rubber meets the road, if you will. And you also mentioned you have data as to the bad actors. Help us understand that a little bit more. Is that generally people who talk the talk, but not really come to fruition?
Oh, no,
when it
some of
comes?
them don't even talk the talk, Commissioner. But if we could, with the data that we have from, we've not done the deep analysis on this, but I can tell you it's there. With the data that we have from UMass Boston, I could name 2 contractors right off the top of my head. I'm not going to do that.
You don't have to.
But
right.
no, but with the data we have from UMass Boston, we can extrapolate those subcontractors who have been consistently resistant and consistently shown bad numbers. And the thing with UMass Boston is that contractor will be listed right under a contractor who does similar work that has met the numbers. So it's very clear. And I would also say that in terms of UMass Boston, many more contractors are trying to do this, understand that this is the way. The ones who are not trying to do it are really lagging behind in the industry and are not getting it. And they stand out because of that. Yeah, we have a tremendous amount of data now because of UMass Boston. And many of these subcontractors or area subcontractors are going to be bidding on your work too.
And let me add, getting the data online has been a piece of our work. So 3 or 4 years ago, we created a working group on the Boston residents' jobs policy, which set the goals for the women, people of color, and Boston residents. And under the leadership of City Councilors Ayanna Presley and Mike Ross, we got an ordinance passed to put the compliance data online. So anyone can go to the City of Boston website or Google the Boston residents' jobs policy, and it's a little unwieldy, but it's there. So you can look up the compliance, the history of any contractor, of any job that's in that database. And there's 3 or 4 years on there now. They're a little behind. They're behind. It's not super up to date on one part of it, but we've never had access to that data before. And so if you've got somebody in front of you that claims that they can do this and they're all for it, but you've looked up that they have a history of never meeting any of these goals, you're in a different, you get to have a different conversation with them in terms of pushing it and holding them accountable to their history.
And this is why I think that, because it is a little cumbersome now, the data's in two different places, and the city data is not well organized, although we're working on that with the city. But this is why I think it's a discussion for you to have with your licensees, whether they can include in their bid documents that the subcontractors include a 3-year look back on their diversity history. It would be simple for the subcontractors to do it. And it'll save everybody else a tremendous amount of time and effort to go through all that other data. And like I say, Bond Brothers is doing it, Turner's doing it. If it's done from the top, I think will be much more effective.
So Turner and Bond Brothers routinely ask subcontractors in their bid materials to give their diversity records.
I don't want to overspeak. I've spoken with Allison Stanton. I know she's using the Boston data to do her own review. Bond Brothers does have some requirements in their bid documents.
Okay. Mr. Stebbins?
Yeah, glad to hear you say good things about Turner, because obviously they're doing a lot of work right now for our one licensee. We have 2 entities that have been designated for a license. So when you go back to the elements in the state law, excuse me, the bigger projects have not submitted their affirmative action programs yet to us. And we have a window in which to do that after they officially accept the license. So we may turn to your good offices for your thoughts and feedback or comments on their proposed plans. I did want to, this whole issue is interesting, and obviously we're not the builders of these projects. We're licensing the developer is working with the GC and the subs, et cetera. How important is the selection of the GC to this whole effort?
Very.
I mean, I think 2 things. I think one, it's and to have the history of the generals, which frankly, before a few years ago, almost any history you looked at would have been terrible. Right. But the last 3, maybe 4 years, people are starting to figure out how to do this. But I also believe that any contractor can be brought on board with this. Okay. And but this won't work without very strong and regularly repeated commitment from the top. And you're part of the top, the developer's part of the top, the general contractor, construction manager's part of the top. What happened at the Integrated Science Center is, the governor put access and opportunity into the project labor agreement. Commissioner Cornelison from DCAM was just fiercely attendant to this. And then they hired Mukia Baker Gomez, sorry, I forgot for a second, who has just done a phenomenal job and I think could be also a great resource for you all. So every time people turned around, somebody was saying, no, we're serious. And you need that from the general.
And I think just what we've worked on 2 projects with one major area general contractor, and one project was great and the other one was lousy. So the project manager has a great deal of authority and autonomy on any project. So again, it's like down from the top to feed each unit.
And understand, one of our licensed designees has not yet identified a general contractor in the license condition awarded to that licensed designee. We said, as soon as you have identified your general contractor, we as a commission want to meet with you, excuse me, and talk about those diversity commitments, both on the workforce and in the supplier fronts as well. One thing that has intrigued me from the start of this process is the issue of the diversity in the construction workforce, but brainstorming around the idea that, and I'll use Western Mass as we talked about before as an example of the largest private construction project in the region's history. And is there a way to capitalize on that opportunity is an avenue to market, excuse me, market the project for attracting that diverse construction workforce. Again, people aging out of the workforce need to kind of backfill that, brainstorm on the opportunity that we can work with you to try to drive that opportunity and drive that message.
I think absolutely. Susan likes to say, 50% of the population everywhere is female. So it's not a demographics, it's not you can do it in Boston, you can't do it in Western Mass or somewhere else. And just one example, as I mentioned to you earlier, we, a year ago, some funders came to us and said, will you start a pre-apprenticeship program for women in New Hampshire, where there was no foundation for this, nothing. And we did. And, to sort of pick on my own union for a minute, none of the trades, including mine, whatever we were doing to do outreach for women for the last 20 years has really not produced many, and in some cases any women as new members. I now have 6 women in the local in New Hampshire, down from 1, me, or up from 1. And this pre-apprenticeship program, in 2 months, 1 full-time person and me part-time got 40 women to come to info sessions about this pre-apprenticeship program, and went through a bunch of vetting with them and ended up with our first class of 8 women who have all graduated. 6 of them already got into unions. 3 of them, as of this week, are already working. And this is women who are unemployed or making the minimum wage, so going from $7.25 an hour with no benefits to $16, $17, $18, depending which trade they got into, plus benefits, is just transformative. And that was no foundation, 1.5 people over 2 months in a very focused way, with a very good program. We sort of took the Building Pathways program that's been working in Boston for a couple of years and got their program and took it to New Hampshire, and had very strong commitment from the unemployment office and staff. That's actually where we got most of our people, was reaching out to them, and with a lot of support from them. So this can be done anywhere. I think it would be interesting if the commission, recognizing the amount of work that you potentially have in front of you, was to set up a communication with each of the building trades unions and say, we've got, X billion dollars worth of work coming up. We're really serious about these diversity goals. What's your plan for making sure we meet them? Because you probably need to start doing the outreach to the new apprentices now for when these jobs roll around. And that helps that supply and demand cycle actually work. So that's, sort of an easy step, I think, that you guys could do to help make sure folks are ready in the pipeline for when your projects break ground.
Let me make the job a little bigger than that. As you all know, and you might not have known before you got this job, but you know it now, construction is a major boom and bust industry. We are in Boston pretty well into the boom end of the cycle. In Western Mass, just entering the boom end of the cycle. I've been working around the construction industry since the first days of the Big Dig, so I've seen several of these cycles. My guess is we've got about 6 years, maybe 7, and the casinos might actually boost that end of the cycle up. If we do not have a substantial improvement in the numbers of women and people of color in the construction industry, at the end of that boom, we're going to go right back to where we were. That's what's happened. That's what happened on the Big Dig. We actually did get up to like 6.5% women. Last hired, first fired. And that's true for minorities. There is a substantial amount of bitterness in the minority community, and I'd say cynicism, about these efforts, because there was improvement during the years of the Big Dig. There wasn't enough. Last hired, first fired. So the goal is, the legal goal is 6.9% women's hours. We need 15 to 20% women on jobs in the middle of this boom in order to survive the next bust. With enough of a critical mass that we've made enough change in that cycle to gain ground during the next cycle. That is the nature of construction. In terms of minorities in Boston, we need over 50% minorities in the construction industry in Boston in order to survive the next bust with substantial progress. So 6.9% is a floor, it's not a ceiling. If the message from this commission, from your licensees, from the developers and the GCs goes down, we will never accept less than 6.9% women hours any week on your work. And it can be done. We've shown it can. 6.9% is a low number. We wish it was 10. But if you never accept lower than 6.9%, we will build up that workforce of female and minority employees in the construction industry, people with good careers that will not only change this industry, but will change the economics of neighborhoods all across this state.
Others?
No, that was very comprehensive.
Very good.
I'm right, I think, in assuming that your intention, which you'll be talking to us about, is to pretty much adopt this whole cloth, right?
So
In large part.
I'll be before you on October 23rd or thereabouts to make some recommendations.
It's, and are the databases that they're talking about, is that something that we've been talking about with our suppliers, with our licensees, keeping those databases of numbers?
We haven't talked to our licensees about putting those databases online.
I think that's really worth considering, because for one thing, it would add a tremendous, if we could do this well for these construction projects, that would add a tremendous database for folks like you to look at. But I don't know what the pros and cons are. I haven't really thought about it, but it seems like something we ought to think about.
Well, DCAM's developed, I think Jill and I have spoken, DCAM's developed a really good, transparent, and efficient model. Again, that's something that doesn't have to be invented.
Right. You've talked about this integrated science center. Is the same process being applied to the general academic building?
Yes, yes. Okay. And to the Edward Kennedy Institute, right, and okay, to the utility relocation, and all future projects at UMass Boston. Right.
And in fact, the state took our best practices document, customized it for DCAM and the UMass Building Authority, and are in the process of reviewing that with the intention of adopting that statewide. Right. So they're in the process of, if it's successful, taking what worked here and making that mandatory on all DCAM and UMBA projects in the state.
Right. You know, one thing that's totally clear, and this is probably obvious, but from these conversations now with you twice and other conversations we've had, it's clear that the single critical variable is commitment from the top. You know, if you've got that, you got a chance. If you don't got that, you don't got a chance. And Susan has been on her best behavior here this morning. I think it's not too indelicate to share with the group another of her opinions. She's talking about when we had this presentation, you put all these practices together and do the best practices. That's the blocking and tackling. But to really make it go, you need a badass champion. And I think she's right. I mean, this is hard work. Yeah. People have been working on this and talking about this for a long, long time, and nothing goes anywhere. But I think we are going to have to be the badass champion here and make this happen. Thank you very much.
Fabulous.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to continuing to be able to support your work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It is now noon. We are not going to be able to get everything done, I don't think, before lunch, unless you all really want to. Do we want to take a lunch break now, or do you want to do a little more and take a lunch break later? Game for either. Any preferences?
Lunch for me.
Yeah, all right. So why don't we, it's noon, why don't we adjourn for 45 minutes? Is that enough? Sure. Yeah, so we will reconvene a little about 12:45. All right, we are on to item number 5, which is administrative matters, Executive Director Day.
And good afternoon, Chairman Crosby and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
What I'd like to do here briefly is I do have a few comments on general update. I wanted to emphasize to the Commission, and I think you are aware, but our team at the Commission is busy developing and implementing process, regulations, and infrastructure necessary for the Commission to establish a strict regulatory scheme and to provide efficient and effective oversight of our gaming casinos. Today, as part of that process, we're presenting regulations that deal with transfer, licensee reporting, hearing process, and internal accounting and gaming procedure controls. We'll also have topics like training schools, surveillance, and inspection in process, in the formal regulation process. We are also developing about 7 packages of regulations addressing topics like Racehorse Development Fund and the regulations update for horse racing, financial reporting, alcoholic beverages, responsible gaming features, like credit, underage protection and enforcement, credit card checks, and player management. We're also in the process of developing regulations about complementary services and exclusion lists. I just wanted to give you a little brief glimpse on those that are coming forward.
Can't wait.
Anytime. We're also in the process of scheduling, processing racing applications and scheduling on-site hearings for live racing. In horse racing also, we're finishing an audit and reconciling and converting to an automated system for the numerous distributions in racing. We are continuing to interview candidates for financial investigative positions who will investigate financial stability of applicants and audit facilities. We're also in the process of developing procedures and information necessary to begin recruiting for gaming agents in early 2015 for on-site regulation of Penn's facilities. We're developing needed training to prepare investigators, state police, and gaming agents to enforce gaming laws and regulations. We're working with agencies like the Attorney General's Office and the Plainville local law enforcement to develop agreements needed to define roles and support cooperation. We're continuing development of the process and procedures necessary to receive, investigate, and issue licenses and registration in anticipation of a large number of applications from Penn employees and vendors. We're testing and completing needed changes to the first phase of our licensing data system to support the process and hopefully go live later this fall and be ready for online applications in January. As actually Commissioner McHugh noted earlier, we are working with our licensees to monitor their projects, support outreach to suppliers and workforce, and report progress to the Commission. And at the next meeting, we will have a quarterly report from Penn, a monthly report from MGM, and an initial report from WIN. We're also beginning to organize the process and committees necessary to support the application for distribution of mitigation funds. We've been able to bring on experience to help us to develop a gaming lab and develop expertise to monitor and improve electronic gaming equipment. We've instituted formal process in recruiting and hiring and are continuing recruitment for paralegal and technology positions. We're continuing the final steps to develop a complete policy manual, preparing to begin the process necessary to continue development of evaluation, goals, organization, and plans to support performance. We're also developing an intranet to improve internal communications in the agency. We're planning to move ahead in response, planning a move in response to our lease expiration, implementing changes recommended in our financial system review, and preparing our annual report. Those are just a few items that are going on behind the scenes while we are moving forward with the other processes. And of course, our next item, which we're very proud of, marks the Commission's continued effort to improve our budget development, monitoring, and reporting process. And Derek Lennon, our CFAO, is here to present the 2014 close of our budget and the first report for the first quarter of our 2015 budget. Thanks.
Great.
Thank you, Rick. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
I'm pleased to be here today to update you on the closeout of the MGC's FY14 fiscal activities and the opening of our fiscal year 15. A high-level summary of the information I'm going to present today is that the Commission spent $2.7 million less in fiscal year 2014 than anticipated and exceeded revenue projections by $4.5 million. However, $2.58 million of the underspending in FY14 needs to be rolled forward into the 15 base, and the main reason for exceeding revenue projections was the timing of the receipt of the Region B annual slot fees and partial billing for their assessment. Once balancing forward the FY15 costs and revenues to add to the FY15 initial projections, the Commission's budget would be out of balance by about $44,800, and that would be a deficit. So our spending would project to outpace revenues. We have proposed for you today $61,000 worth of spending reductions, which would offset that negative revenue, which would bring our budget back into a positive state. I know it's not a lot, but it's a good thing to bring us back into a positive after closing out 14. For the majority of this presentation, I know I have a bunch of attachments in here, but I'll ask Amy to just move on to Appendix A, which is the FY14 closeout, and then we'll spend time on the FY15 piece going forward. So as you'll recall, and I'm sorry for the size of this, we moved towards this format in December of 2013, aligning with the state accounting system of tracking our spending classes and our revenues. We had an initial budget in December, which we revised down in April by about $700,000, which brought us to a $23.7 million base. So that's the first three sections on this spreadsheet. Everything after that are our actuals, so it shows our spending by category through December for the first half of the year, which you had seen, and then out through through June. And then the last column that says 2014 accounts payable period is the 2 months that we spend bills for which we pay bills for which we had actually received services prior to June 30th. So that's the reason I'm coming to you in October too, because our books actually didn't close until the end of August. So I would have loved to have been here July, but we were still paying bills for our previous year's commitments. As you'll see at the bottom, we had a $2.7 million underspending. However, we're going to roll forward $2.58 million of that, and the areas that we're going to roll forward are in the consultant services class. We're going to roll forward $1.4 million, and that's for the high performance organization, where we actually received services in May and June for $162,000, and the bills didn't come until September, so we'd actually missed our accounts payable period. So we owe those commitments. The cost was budgeted into 14, the revenue was sitting there. We're going to pay for it in 15, so I'm rolling that revenue forward with your approval. The completion of the financial reviews, due to the fact that the Region A deliberations went a little longer, we didn't get those in front of the commission until just the last meeting when I was here, so we have the balance of that amount to pay off to our consultants. And then the Phase 2 Region A consultant reviews, we collected all of the money from our applicants for what we had anticipated to spend. As you know, we're still doing some closeout right now of pulling together all of the information, filing all the information, so we haven't seen final bills for that. So there was $1.2 million left from what we had collected that we're going to roll forward those contract costs into next year. Whatever we don't spend, we'll refund. Then we have the state aid and grants column. The Sigma-based study underspent by $345,000. It's still services that we need to have done to complete that. We anticipate that those will be spent in FY15, so we rolled forward those costs. We had the revenue budgeted last year. The small business grants, this is the main one for the slot region. We've had a hard time getting a partner down there to work with us. I know that Jill is working very hard to try and reach out to some of the local community organizations down there with Commissioner Stebbins to figure out how we can reduce the stringency of our reporting to get someone to take a grant for $20,000. And then the final one is the local grants, which we can collect from money from our applicants to fund the possibility of hosts and surrounding communities to implement this piece of the law. And then the final piece that we're rolling forward is $640,000 for our licensing management system. We've had delays in that. It's a milestone-based contract that as you hit a milestone, we release funding. We had anticipated $900,000 spent last year. We only spent $300 of it, so we're rolling that amount forward because we do anticipate to have that live in beginning of calendar year 2015. Any questions on the roll forward expenditures before I move on to revenues?
Very clean and well done.
The final revenues for 14 were $42.7 million. This is a $4.5 million higher than the projected amounts. So this is a bunch of ups and downs, and I think we, especially for our first time around and not knowing what the world would look like, we did a pretty good job projecting for this first year. The Region B slots fees, annual slot fee and partial assessment came in at $4.96 million. We had budgeted that in FY15, so that's the main reason we're up. Our Phase 2 category collections were $796,000 below our projections, and that's because when we initially projected, we had put in the same amount for Region B as we had for the 2 applicants for Region A. Because there was no competition, there was a lot less analysis done on the part of our consultants. And the final bills didn't come in until late into July or August. Our revenue doesn't work the same way as our payments do, so revenue has to be collected before July 1st. So we didn't send the bill out until August. We collected that money, and that will actually be an FY15 revenue for $350,000. And then our grant collections came in above our anticipations, so we had a lot more communities asking for money based on the analysis that they did. So out of the $42.7 million FY14 revenue, we've actually we've actually taken a look at all of our commitments and restricted revenue sources. $21.7 million will balance into FY15, and the first 3 of these are actually restricted revenues, so we can only spend these can't be used for general purposes. The grant collections of $171,000, which I said we have to roll forward those expenditures, those corresponding revenues rolling forward. The Phase 1 investigation collections, which I have an attachment. It's attachment F to this. Shows all the applicants who have remaining balances. Most likely, those will be refunded, with the exception of 1 applicant from Region C, where we haven't determined what will happen there. And then the Phase 2 Category 1 collections, as I said, we're still paying out those bills for the Region A. In our initial projections, we thought we would spend about $3.5 million of the $17.5 million licensing fee that we transferred over. We underspent that, but that's once again because we're rolling forward a lot of costs. So we'll roll forward, instead of $14 million, $14.7 million of the initial 17.5 that we took. So we still did need 2.8 million to close out FY14, or else we wouldn't have had money without taking from a restricted revenue source.
Dirk, you mentioned this briefly, but the grants figure that you're rolling forward, 171,000.
Correct.
Is expected that not all of it will be spent or requisitioned by the surrounding communities? This is all surrounding community. Correct. Negotiation, agreement.
Correct, surrounding
grants,
or
right?
host.
Or host,
yes.
Okay.
So we've gotten some late requests recently, so I would have said some of it's yes, some of it's a no, but
right.
It'll be a wash on our balance sheet because I'm going to roll forward 171,000 in spending and 171,000 in revenue. If we don't pay out the spending, I'll decrease the spending and refund the revenue, so it'll just be a wash. As one goes up, the other one will go down.
But sounds like you're generally comfortable that there will be a positive balance that would be eventually refunded, as opposed to the other way around.
Correct, and that's why we went through this, to make sure that we're not eating into the dedicated funds. We've got them all segregated. Right. We know what we owe back to people. We know what we're sitting on to pay bills against, and when the process is over, we'll be able to give refunds where it's appropriate.
Right, and we have not gotten any sort of request or expenditures for Region C at this point on that rubric.
So we have some requests, not on the grant side. On the applicant side, we just got a bill from one of our consultants for early investigations they had done. We're making sure we haven't paid that already.
Okay.
And billed it to a different area. But yes, we got a bill from our investigative consultant for, I think it was $18,000.
Okay.
So now we'll move on to the FY15. Thank you, Amy. Well ahead of me. So our initial projections for the Gaming Control Fund were $24.5 million in expenditures. We had net revenues of about $3.7 million. which left us with an assessment on our licensees of $20.78 million to balance out. As reported in the summary, we're balancing forward $2.5 million in additional projected expenses and $2.53 in additional revenues, which would leave us in a deficit of $44.8 thousand. I'm also, at this time, I'd like to take a side note to let you know that we've loaded each division's budget, which was a request of the commission, onto the state accounting system. We have a copy of that report. It's Appendix C to this document, and I won't walk you through, but we have every single division at the same level as here, and then when they roll up, they'll roll up to our bottom line, which is nice. Our backup matches front up. That's always a good thing in the budgeting world. But back to this report, and the reason I went to that is so that I'll reference some of the ups and downs, and to let you know how we got to the ups and downs. We actually have those details loaded into the accounting system, so I wanted to let you know we're not making these up off the back of an envelope.
That's good.
It's always a good thing. So in this report, what you'll have is our initial projection. You have an FY14 balance forward column, which we just went over. There's a detailed report, Appendix E, in there that goes over all those balance forwards. Our approved adjustments. Now, those approved adjustments are where division managers have actually asked for net zero changes. I have that included in the report. Well, it's Appendix D. And I have it spun two ways. I have it one, so that it lines up with this report by object class, and then the second way, so it lines up by division, so you'll actually see the net zeros, in case anyone wants to check the math on it. And then finally, I have a proposed adjustments column where these are areas that we have either asked for additional spending from you because we don't have a place within the division's budget to have a corresponding down, or I've identified payroll savings with the assistance of our HR department from delayed hirings and the corresponding fringe decreases to offset those ups. So I'll do is do a quick walkthrough of the details behind, I think it's our proposed adjustments column. So we're asking for a $170,000 decrease in payroll, and that comes from delays in hiring from the legal division. We had a member leave, as well as we were trying to hire a paralegal, which we've had difficulties. Our IT division, which we've had difficulties getting gaming lab manager, as well as another technical position, and then the Investigations and Enforcement Bureau, where we were hoping to have 3 or 4 financial investigators hired at this time, and we've only been able to hire 1. So we've found some substantial savings there, and then another 28% increase on top of that due to the fringe rate that the state charges for salaries on employees. Under the B object class, I'm looking for a small increase of $2,000. There was a good opportunity for one of our licensing division employees to get some experience. We hadn't had it budgeted. But worst case scenario, we can always pull it from another division towards the end of the year if you don't approve that at this point. And then under the consultant services, due to Region A extending as long as it had, we had some additional costs for streaming a video, conference space, that ate up most of the year's budget. So I'm asking for that amount to be reinstated so that we can continue to have these meetings. We're also, I'm also pleased.
I'm sorry, just to, the 170,000 adjustment down for employee takes into account the now forecast higher
the new dates. Yeah, the new
dates.
forecasted higher dates. So one of the positions, the gaming lab manager, we're not anticipating we'll be able to hire that until January or February. It's just been a hard search. For the other positions that are in the timeline, I've talked to our HR director, Trupti, and she's let me know that based on interview schedules and average background check, this is when we can expect to hire these people. Now, a lot of these people we're expecting in the July or August because the positions were posted, we had candidates, and for whatever reasons, didn't work out. So we've got some substantial savings and anticipated savings from
Fair
from
enough.
that.
Has there been
Not that it's a good thing, but it's helped us out with.
Yeah. Is it, what have we done? We thought we were going to have several more people on board. How have we done the work that they were supposed to do? Or did we not really need them?
No, we've needed them, and in the financial investigations unit, we've had more contract costs.
You've been using the consultants
Yeah,
instead?
yeah, but what we've done is we've limited them to, especially with the non-gaming vendors, non-gaming primary vendors, the cap of the $5,000 fee for the investigation. And we said when it hits that point, you really need to let us know because we can't afford to go above that.
I might add too, Mr. Chairman, on the financial investigator side, we actually were not successful in hiring an assistant director for that section. So we kind of changed our tack to bring on qualified people with investigative and financial background and then train them into the position as we go forward.
Right.
I had a question on the same, on a related vein, and that number that's budgeted for FY15 for consultants seems high to me. We, FY14, FY13, we've been heavily reliant on consultants, understandably, for the review of this year, calendar year 14, I guess, for the review of the applications, and then previously to get ourselves set up and get the structure and the like. But what could you help me with this number? Or just not detail, but just sort of generally what we're doing.
So we've got a lot of oversight project management costs built into this, and we have that for 3 sites, which is a substantial piece of that. We've got the high performance project built into there, which is another decent sized chunk of change, and we've got there was another very
I forgot, we have the oversight contracts, don't we?
Yes.
And that'll be for 3 sites.
correct. Oh, and we also have a good portion of money built in for Region C. So if we don't spend that, our revenue will go down as well as our
I see, that includes
our expenditures.
the
Yeah,
reserve
that's
for Region C.
Region C. And then we have, I think, it was around 1.6 million set aside for investigative investigative billings for our licensees. Now, that can go down if we get financial investigators in, but if we don't, I wanted to leave that number in there because that's...
Now, our licensing system is also reflected in that category, right?
No, that's under the, one of the bottom ones, the UU object class. So it's it's IT, non-payroll expenses.
Okay,
So it's a different sort of consultant.
okay.
We've talked about this before, and from what you're saying, I'm sure we are watching it, but the cutting down on consultants, and if we have ongoing needs, hiring people is obviously the way to go, and I'm sure you're aware of that.
We completely agree. We'd like to go that route too.
Right.
Because then those licensing fees actually become money-making, and we have to put less of an assessment onto our industry
Right.
versus a break-even where whatever we're paying
Right.
out balances the costs.
Right.
And I do know that, for instance, all the license application and vendors that have come in have been handled by IAB, with the exception where there's needed more detailed financial investigation, which we're lacking a little bit of expertise on that side.
Right. Okay, thanks.
So then just quickly on the approved revenue increases, we talked about the $705,000 for the difference between what we're projecting on the balance forward of licensing fees. The 653 is all in Appendix F, which shows the amount that we still have from Phase 1 applications by applicant. The Phase 2 Category 1 collections includes the 1.2 from Region A as well as the 350,000 that I spoke about that we collected later in Region B. And then you have the 171,000 for the grant collections, and then our initial projections for what the Region A winner would, or determinee would be, was a little lower than what the actual number of slots they had was, so it bumped it up by about 68,000.
Okay.
So My ask to the commission is to, if they have any questions here, otherwise, if we would move forward on approving the proposed adjustments I have to bring the commission's budget back into balance. And one last thing I'd like to do is I'd like to thank the commission staff, the administration and finance team for embracing this process and this level of transparency, as it allows me to produce detailed level information for you to make decisions, and it makes the commission and me look good. So really none of this could happen if the other directors, Rick, and to go from the previous presentation, the tone from the top from you have been very, very supportive, which makes my job much easier and allows me to provide good information to you to make decisions.
Great.
Great.
Comments, questions?
So the bottom line is an adjustment of 44,826 at this point. Is that a fair statement?
Well, no, it's 61,710, which will bring us back about 17,000 into the positive.
Oh, I'm looking
Because
at the
we're
wrong
off by
column.
40. We're off by 44, and I'm proposing 61,000 of cuts, which will give us a little bit of breathing room in case another travel comes up or something along those lines.
And you're reasonably comfortable that the increases in some of these line items will be manageable for the next 3 quarters, as you have used the delay in hiring to offset those.
Correct.
And that also is going to wind down because, well, we're catching up with the hiring.
Correct. And a lot of that had to do, if you look at the majority of these upticks, it had to do with the Region A extension.
Right.
So
Right.
people have been pretty good about living within their budget where they can, but where those pressures, we just couldn't anticipate that many meetings and that type of need for additional support.
If I might, in really recognition of Derek's and his staff's efforts, there's a couple bottom lines in here that I think are really important to emphasize when we're looking at our budget. Number one is that fiscal year 14 was 2.7 million under expend. It's always much better from a budget perspective to have it that way than a reverse. That the revenues exceeded expectations for 14, which I think is another point that's very significant. And not to mention the projections, we're off by about 44,000 so far, which means our projections and our budget estimations are really accurate at this point. I'd like to note too that Derek didn't spend too much time on it, but he did identify that we now have the budget online and it's available to each one of our directors, so we have the ability to have accountability for our management processes and their management of the funds that they've requested. And one thing that goes a little bit unnoticed is that in one of his paragraphs, and quickly he announced that we're pleased to report in fiscal 15 we'll be tracking and reporting all appropriations for MGC is responsible for direct expenditures.
So that's on
the
this
same level of
sheet.
detail.
That's
So
on
that-
Appendix B. If Amy scrolls down a little bit, you'll see that we have all the other appropriations on there. Now, what we didn't do is adjust for the racing division yet because we don't know what the atmosphere or the landscape will be, so I can't really give you downward revenue projections or downward spending trends until we know what we can anticipate. So I can tell you the racing director and I have been looking at that on a daily basis, that we are, once we get a better idea, we'll be able to make adjustments because we have a better handle on the type of revenue that's coming in and the streams and where it goes to. But we will be able to post the same level of detail for every appropriation as we did for the Gaming Control Fund in FY14.
And this is all on our website?
It will be up on the website. After each meeting, I post it up on the website. But we do update this on a monthly basis if I don't have the commission meeting. My staff updates it, and it's up there so that you can see the latest and greatest information.
And I
On the
think-
website.
On our website, under the budget
Good,
section.
Good, that's great.
I think we've also noted that, or we haven't noted, but I think it's important to recognize our licensees that with Region B, MGM, also recently WIN has paid its $6.3 million responsibility to the budget as well, and Penn as well.
Penn paid their $1.75 million.
So the licensees are complying with and supporting the regulations as they're developed.
I gotta say, I am really pleased with this report in general, but specifically on all of the work that has gone to lead to this framework and this sort of reporting. This really, in my opinion, is the central point to good financial management, and you've done a lot of work. Your staff has done a lot of work to get to this point. And although we have an adjustment, I think this is the nature of this year or these transition years, certain things that we cannot anticipate, and a lot of these might end up being, par for the course on an ongoing basis. So I'm very pleased with the report, and I thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I echo that. I think it's easy to follow, and it's streamlined, and then if necessary, it's easy to drill down into these various categories, and the fact that we can put it up there and let everybody see it is really, really good, I think.
Agreed.
Thank
So
you.
we do need a motion, Commissioner Zuniga.
Yeah, let me make a motion, Mr. Chairman. I would move that this commission approve the requested budget amendments to the fiscal year 15 budget as represented and discussed here today. Period.
Second?
Second.
15 or 14?
Fiscal year 15.
Okay.
We're already,
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it 4-0.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you.
We are on to item 6, the Racing Division, Director Dernberger.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair,
Good
Commissioners.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A brief administrative update for you. When last we met, I had notified you that the HBPA, which is the recognized bargaining agent for the owners and trainers of the thoroughbred racehorses, was having an election. They did have their election, ballots were counted, and I wanted to let you know that their leadership was seated last Thursday, so we've been in active discussions with them. We do anticipate that they're going to provide some requests, some things for us to look at. We've given the legal department a couple of heads up on what we think might be coming in, so we've just maintained an open door, open phone policy. So we've been talking to people, stakeholders on a daily basis. As you know, live racing concluded Saturday at Suffolk Downs. I want to give you a meet and snapshot of the Commission's activities out there. We'll do the same for Plain Ridge on the October 23rd meeting. Their last day of live racing is October 22nd. At Suffolk this year, to date, our licensing staff has issued approximately 1,500 occupational licenses. That is down significantly from previous years. The uncertainty surrounding this year's meet certainly had something to do with that. Our stewards have issued 90 administrative rulings. They imposed 45 administrative fines. Our staff of veterinarians and veterinary assistants collected 1,138 post-race equine drug testing samples and 857 pre-race blood gas testing samples to help ensure the integrity of the race for the parimutuel customers and our racing's participants. Our licensees complied with the strictest medication regulations in the country. Our clear rate of 99.64% through September 22nd is identical to that seen nationwide.
Clear rate, does that mean that are
Negative
yeah,
tests, yep.
There's nothing wrong with the test, yeah.
Nothing wrong with the test. So nationally, 99.66, we were 99.64, right on target. And don't forget that we did all this with a major set of regulation changes in the last 2 years. So that 99.66 national rate is in jurisdictions that have been following these medication rules for some time. This was something new for our stakeholders, and I think that stands as a testament to their willingness to get on board. For the just concluded 65 race day meet, there were 4,017 starters at Suffolk Downs and 560 races. This produced two remarkable metrics of focus to our industry. One was average field size, 7.17. This is no doubt one of the highest in the country. Our catastrophic injury rate at 1.24 per 1,000 starters. That's a 30% reduction from last year, and without question, one of the lowest in the country.
What was that number again?
Catastrophic injury rate, 1.24 per 1,000 starters. That's a metric that we can compare across all jurisdictions.
Right.
It's a 30% reduction from last year. National average is 1.9, so without question, this was one of the lowest in the country.
That's great.
And I know the significance of this is probably difficult for you to appreciate, but I'm compelled to point out that this was all achieved with a peak population of 675 horses in the later stages of their career. Commissioners, this was a meet for the history books.
Because you said they're mostly older horses, they're substantially older horses who are more prone to accidents. That's the
There is an equine injury database that 93% of all North American racetracks, thoroughbred tracks, participate in. And the statistics from that, they've done a lot of statistical analysis for a 5-year period of time, which is an incredible number of data points. And in that 5-year data point, they've come up with, I think, 9 risk factors that appear to be correlated with injury. And so we do what we call risk profiles of the horses. If you risk profile the horses at Suffolk Downs, most of them would have the majority of those risk factors just by nature of their demographics. So.
And age is one of the big ones, I got.
Age is one of them, yeah.
7.17 starters per race is high for the country?
It is, yep. And I actually don't, I should have the national average in front of me, but it's slightly below 7, I think. And,
Below 7?
Yeah.
And is that, why is that? Is there a trend line over the last few years? You've talked about this before.
Yeah, decreasing
downward,
field size,
right?
yeah. Decreasing field size. Which is related to a number of things. It's related to a decrease in the foal crop, so the number of horses that are out there, and at the same time, an increase in the number of race days. So more races, fewer horses, less field size.
What do you target? What's sort of an optimal field size?
If you were the operator, as many as you can put in the starting gate safely. So 12 would be great. The reason for that is the pari-mutuel customer has more betting choices.
Right.
So you are, in some states, there are exotic wagers that you can't even offer to your customers if you only have 6 horses in the gate. And so it's just the menu. And then the value added, right? So if you have a 3 or 4 horse field and you have one big favorite, you're not going to get much. You're going to get 10 cents maybe if you wager $2. Not exactly a value bet, but if you've got 12 of them in there, you probably have a pretty good chance at finding a horse that has a good, acceptable return on investment.
Is there a minimum field size below which you can't have a race?
Below which you can't? No, you can actually have one. It's called a walkover. The track would decide in Massachusetts whether or not they wanted to do that. They would probably cancel all wagering in that event because they're responsible for a minus pool. But we do have a number of times at both racetracks where the field size is such that they may cancel show wagering or they may cancel a trifecta wagering. Sometimes even place wagering depending on the race.
But the counter to the number of field size is the race days, right? The number of races.
Yep, not enough horses, too many races.
Right.
Yeah. And we do see also that the number of starts a horse makes lifetime has decreased as well. There's also a trend line there.
Why? Why is that?
Well, that's the big debate, right? Is it medication? Are we breeding a more fragile breed? And we could sit here and talk for 3 days about that, and I'd love to do that, Commissioner. But that's one of the debates right now. And medication is certainly something that the industry is looking at.
And so that decreases the number of lifetime starts because the horses break down, or just because they're sent out to stud or pasture earlier?
Both of those would be contributing factors. We've also done a lot better. I think this is something, this is Director Dernberger's personal opinion. I haven't seen this necessarily discussed in the trade publications, but we also do a better job now of stopping horses, maybe one race before we would have in the past, because of our industry's commitment to aftercare. So I know that when I was on the front lines and we would look at horses, we would send horses out that we kind of knew they were reaching the end of their career. I think we've done a lot more with the commitment of funds within the industry and awareness at actually stopping horses now, one race before what would have been their last race. So maybe they would have run 23 times, and now we stop them at 22 and make sure they have a good home.
And whose decision is that?
Those are
The
the
track veterinarian or the owner or the trainer?
Well, ultimately the owner, but there's a number of horses that are presented on race day that are presented as in-to-go horses, and they're going to go.
What kind of horses?
In today, they're in that day.
Right.
And they're every intention of being raced, and the regulatory veterinarian comes along in the morning and says, not today, and then they don't run again. So that tells me that we've made some good. To that note, we've got a lot of statistics that we'd like to review over the winter, and I think we can demonstrate what a good job the regulatory veterinarians at Suffolk Downs did. I think when you look at the horses where they intervened, we've got some really interesting preliminary statistics that show what a good job they did.
Gee, that's great.
Yeah.
Great.
Administrative update concluded, and I would like to update you on the live racing applications that we received. The deadline, as you know, was October 1st, last Wednesday. So we did receive 4 applications for live horse racing in the Commonwealth in 2015. The first one is from Springfield Gaming and Redevelopment. This is an application to conduct a 105-day live harness race meet at Plain Ridge Racecourse in Plainville, Massachusetts. The proposed meet, the schedule conducted primarily on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from April 1st through November 30th. They are looking at running Sundays, replacing Mondays in April and May. We have an application from the Brockton Agricultural Society. This is a placeholder application, and we'll revisit that again in a few moments, for a one-day, one-day live thoroughbred race meet at the Brockton Fairgrounds. This application may be later amended to apply for a maximum of 15 days. And the Middleborough Agricultural Society, which is another license from the Department of Ag at the same facility, a placeholder application for a one-day live thoroughbred race meet at the Brockton Fairgrounds. This one also may be later amended to apply for a maximum of 15 live racing days. And the reason for the 2 separate applications is that our statute limits Fair Society to 15 live racing days. The Department of Ag statute does enable, as you can see in this instance, a couple of different ways to do business on the same facility. So we have 2 entities, essentially, 1 facility, each one applying for 15 days, or could apply, is eligible to apply for 15 days. And then we have the New England Horsemen's Benevolent and Protective Association. This is also a placeholder application for a one-day live thoroughbred race meet at Suffolk Downs. This one could be later amended to a minimum of 65 live racing days, or such other number of racing days as may be approved by the Commission, in the interest of the health and safety of horses, riders, and drivers. So here's what happens next. Public comments are being solicited. They are up on the website, these applications. We're going to solicit those. We'll accept them until 5 p.m. on Thursday, October 30th, so at least 3 weeks there. The applications and a link to them are available on the website. We have public hearings in the proposed host communities. These are scheduled in Plainville, at the Plainville Senior Center, Monday, October 20th at 1:30 p.m. In Brockton, the Conference Center at Massasoit, also Monday, October 20th. That one's at 10:30 a.m. And then in Boston, 1000 Washington Street. That one's on Tuesday, October 21st at 10 a.m.
Do you need a commissioner at those? I forget.
They are public hearings, so in the past, we have not, I think a commissioner or 2 have attended. I think the legal division ran the hearings last year.
But there's no requirement of that.
I don't believe so. Catherine is...
Last year, you appointed me to run the hearings. I think it would be appropriate to have a commissioner to do it.
Because we do it on the reg hearings, yeah. So we should talk about, presumably, Commissioner Cameron would sort of be the presumptive one maybe, but others of us might be interested too, so. Where's Janice? We should make sure we keep that in mind. Thanks.
So if you can attend, and even if you do attend, we will, of course, assemble the comments received at the hearings, as well as the public comments from the website solicitations, and then we will report to you at the public meeting here on November 6th, what we have heard from the public, our recommendations vis-a-vis the requests themselves, the applications themselves. By law, you have to grant or dismiss each application no later than November 15th. Now, with these placeholder applications, a mechanism exists, a statutory mechanism, whereby successful applicants, if you grant the license, they can later file an amended or supplementary application, so long as they relate to the same premises. We would probably, under the circumstances, although it's not required to have a second public hearing, given the brevity of the detail provided in these applications, I think we'll probably recommend having a second public hearing as those come in. If you do receive any supplemental applications, you do have to take action on them within 30 days. So we'll certainly update you should we receive any supplements in the future. And I'm happy to answer any questions on what we do have. They've all been deemed administratively complete, but we have not started tearing them apart yet.
Supplemental applications from the people who've applied, right?
Applied, and you would have had to have granted the license as it.
Oh, I
yep.
understand. But it's, yeah, okay. So the window for applications, though, has now closed, right?
Correct.
And this is what we have. This is what we have, these four.
Correct.
The Plain Ridge number is substantially up from this past year, right?
Yep, so there are requirements in 23K that apply to them as a gaming licensee.
Right.
They will actually increase from here. In 2016, I
Right.
think, that goes up
Right.
to 115 and then 125.
Right.
The third year of operation.
Right. And I suppose this will come out in the hearings. Is the horse population going to be a problem with that or an issue with that?
So with the purse supplements anticipated from the Racehorse Development Fund, that should help increase the supply. The supply here, of course, has been one of the main factors has been the lower purse relative to the other harness tracks in the region.
Right.
That do benefit from expanded gaming. So the Racehorse Development Fund and the supplemental purses were meant to remedy that.
Right. Right. Well, that'll be exciting to see if that works.
I think that was the plan.
Yeah, no, I know, but it's gonna be exciting to watch it unfold.
Yeah. And I think some of the metrics that the racing division has been mandated to report to you vis-a-vis the Racehorse Development Fund in future years, a lot of the metrics, some of the things we were just talking about, field size being one of them,
Right.
we'll be tracking those closely and
Right.
reporting to you.
Right, right. Okay, looks,
What statute has the 15-day maximum for the fair, for the agricultural society? Is that 128A?
That's in 128A.
Is there any public feedback on the Horsemen's Association proposal? Any sense of plausibility, what it looks like, anything?
I think everybody's talking. I think that it's too premature, but we don't know what the details are. So I think one thing I can tell you is that it's going to require some legislative reform. So it's, that's...
Yeah. Got it.
well, okay, I want to see.
Last time you gave us a report, you mentioned that the association was going through their yearly election, or their
Yes.
election period. Is that now before us?
So the election is over.
Past.
Yep, the election's over, and the new leadership was seated last Thursday,
Okay.
just a week ago. It feels like a month. I'm sure it feels like that to them as well, but just a week ago.
Anything else?
Just a quick question on Plain Ridge's application. Replacing some of their Monday days with Sundays in April and May. Obviously, they're not necessarily large crowd dependent, but I would think switching to more weekend dates, and I understand all the conflicts. that
They
creates.
are in the room, I believe. My guess would be that they're still doing construction at that point, but do you wish to comment? I hate to make assumptions.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
Great to be here.
Introduce yourself, Steve.
Steve O'Toole, General Manager of Racing at Plain Ridge Racecourse. So it was kind of a feat to cram 105 days into an eight-month period, but it's easy to explain when you say we're going from the first day of April to the last day of November. So that's an easy schedule to explain. But the reasoning behind the Sundays early in the meet, we did have some positive feedback on the racing on the weekends. We did see a little bit of a bump in handle, so we wanted to try and go as many Sundays as possible before the opening of the casino. In consultation with Lance George, the general manager, and John Finnemore and Chris McElwain, and from their experience at other properties, Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays are very popular when a facility first opens. And even though we have a very large parcel of land there, it still has its constraints, and parking is one of them. So with all that taken into consideration, we did continue the Sunday racing for the first 2 months with the anticipated June 2015 opening, and then it just looked like it was just going to be way too bogged down.
So you'd rather race on the weekends from the standpoint of the racing handle, but you're concerned that there won't be enough parking for both the better racing days and the casino?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, the anticipation from what the experts, and Lance is definitely an expert in the field, we're going to be very busy on those weekends, and just to put the live racing pressure on top of that. And traditionally, this is really the first year that we've consistently gone weekends, and we did that to ease the construction, which was a good move, because Wednesdays is very cramped on the site. I think Director Durenberger had to park on the driveway one day when she visited, but we just felt that was the way to go.
I guess that's a nice problem to have, but it's kind of unfortunate that you have to give up one for the sake of the other.
Well, traditionally, we have gone weekdays up until this past season, and 4 o'clock in the afternoon post time for most of the season when the light is available to us has worked out well. The Twilight card has worked out well, that patrons can come in the late afternoon. But some of the people that can't, that have come on the weekends, have definitely appreciated it this year. So that's why we stayed with it.
Could you also have to you also have to consider how your product is competing with product around the country, right? For the whole pari-mutuel.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
The weekends we did well on track, but what's called the host handle, and that's all the other locations around the country betting on us, it wasn't well received because there's just so much product on the weekends. So when we go Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, especially on the Mondays, we pretty much own that time slot, and I anticipate our host handle to be a lot better as it was. I mean, if we go back to 2004, 2005, we were handling $500,000 from other tracks betting on us.
Interesting. Anything else for Director Durenberger, General Manager O'Toole? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to suggest a very quick break before we go to legal. We are ready to reconvene with General Counsel Blue.
So good afternoon, Commissioners. We have before you today 4 different sets of regulations. These regulations are all in the very first draft discussion stage. They have not been posted necessarily for comments in any broad sense. I will take you through the transfer and the hearing regs. Loretta and Todd and Bruce will take you through the remaining regs. And then once we have our conversation today, we can determine which next steps we'll take. Most likely, we will start putting them out for some kind of informal comment, take those comments, incorporate them, and then bring them back for more discussion on our part before we get into the formal process. So I think the first one we have is the transfer regulations. This is an entirely new regulation. We early on last year started our discussion on how we wanted to treat potential transfers of gaming licenses. We did not create a regulation at that time. We reserved the section for this. And I think what has happened in the interim is we've learned a lot more about the industry, and we have a much better idea on the kinds of regs we would want to have for transfers. So the purpose of this regulation is to set up a process for transferring a gaming license or an interest in a gaming license. The general rule in this regulation is that there can be no transfer without an approval by the Commission. It covers basically 4 situations, because this is what we've come to understand a little better. It covers the transfer of a license post the operation certificate, so when it's an ongoing business. It covers the transfer of a license after an award, but before it goes into operation. It covers the transfer of an interest in a pending application, which is something that we had some discussion about earlier. And then it covers entering into a contract for a transfer. So those were the, we've started to understand that there are different potential points in the process where a license may or may want to be transferred. Some transfers aren't covered, and those are the kinds of transfers where the ultimate transfer would result in less than a 5% change. Certain transfers done by public companies, transfers to a bona fide banking institution, and transfers of gaming equipment if it's less than or equal to 5% of the total value of the gaming equipment that's with the gaming establishment. The regulation sets up a process for the commission to review, and it also sets up for the payment of fees if we have to do investigation into the transferee. It requires notice to the commission of a potential transfer. The commission then has options. They can refer this to the IEB for investigation, which will be most likely the case, I would imagine. The commission can require a new RFA-1 application, or in fact even a new RFA-2 application if that's warranted. The transferee will have to show that they will comply with all of the statutory requirements. It provides for the commission to hold a hearing on the transfer. And if it's not in operation, the transferee will have to show that they will comply with all of the other requirements of that license as it was granted. Just to remind the commissioners, our statute requires that if a license is transferred, it has to stay in the same location. So we're really not talking about transferring from one location to another. We don't have that option under our statute, but it's the ownership of the particular license. The commission then has the ability to approve, deny, or ask for more information regarding a transfer. And then this regulation also, and this is something I think we would look for input from the commissioners, it attempts to deal with our statutory language that seems to require that some portion of an increase in the value of a license gets transferred to the Commonwealth. So that language in this regulation is basically proposed for the commission's consideration. That language has always been a little vague, and we tried to address it as best we could, but we will be looking for input on that. The regulation also adds language about holding an interest in more than one license. It requires it to be less than a 5% interest. Again, that's something that we can look at. And it also requires that each licensee add certain language to their organizational documents that show that any transfer is subject to approval by the commission. So this is the general scope and what we've been trying to accomplish with this regulation.
Questions, issues?
Yeah, I'm looking at page 5 where you've highlighted this is right on the notion of the percent share with the Commonwealth if there's value increasing as a result of the transferring of a license. Can you help me understand the 15% under subparagraph C that you've proposed here?
So what we've done, well, the 15% is an arbitrary number. Now, we made a distinction between Section C and Section D, where in Section D, it's a percentage where there hasn't been issued an operational certificate. So that's in the situation where a license has been awarded, but it's not in business. In Section C, this one is for someone for a license that has been in operation. There are any number of ways to structure this, and we could structure potentially different ways if the commission wanted to do that.
What was the thought process between 50% and 15 in the two different circumstances?
I think because again, it is somewhat arbitrary. I think the idea is that once it's been in business for a while, they've gotten some value out of it. The Commonwealth has gotten some value out of it, so maybe the percentage should be lower. When it hasn't been in business yet, I think we want to discourage people from, sort of transferring quickly unless there is some really important circumstance. The other thing, too, to keep in mind is we really can't do a transfer except for certain prescribed situations under statute for a Category 2 because the term of that license is short. So this would come into play more often in a Category 1 license where you have a longer term and you want to encourage people to come in, operate for the long term, and hopefully not transfer unless there's a very good reason.
I guess just to complement that thought, which I'll come back and talk about it later. If an operator has created value over a number of years of operating, more of these would be their own making, and therefore more they would get to keep, as at least under that rationale. I am of the personal opinion that the starting point should be 50% in every situation. 50. Yeah. It's not 0. It's not 100, as the statute is very, is vague in this notion. We share in the Commonwealth shares in any appreciation. And I'd say let's start with 50, because it's in the smack middle. But I understand the notion, or I appreciate that the distinction, and the way I think about it is, well, not only the Commonwealth has received some value, but at least some of it would have been attributable to the expertise of the operator.
Yeah. Well, on these same, I don't have enough information to debate about 15 to 50. I mean, I will get feedback, and it'll be interesting to talk about it. So the whole concept. But how does, just give me an example of how this would actually be applied. What is the base price, and what is the increase price? How do you our value? What is that arithmetic?
The base price is the $85 million for the license. So the way I envision it is the licensee will have to separately account for their license. The initial value will be what they paid for it, and then over time on their books they're going to have to carry it with some other sort of value.
Mm-hmm. Well, nobody's going to buy a license for $85 million. Nobody's going to sell a license for $85 million if they've also put $700 million into the property. Right?
Well, you would,
all of that would be taken into account in the purchase price. But you're thinking about only the value of the license. In the transfer of a property, there will be all kinds of assets and liabilities that go with it.
Well, it does extend to that. It says transferred licenses, property, or interest.
so you would separately, the licensee would be required as part of the transfer to separately value the license is what would happen. So, and that's not unusual in certain commercial sales where certain pieces of the sale have separate values. That's what this regulation would push them to do.
But in this situation, and I was actually going to raise this in another context, but we're also taking take Section C, we're also taking 15% of the increased value of the property if the property is sold. So,
well, we would have to, if that's how you read this language, then I think we need to fix it, because our statute really focuses on the value of the license, not necessarily the increase in say the real property, for example.
all right, well, in that case, then on the first page, it is very clear that it talks about any infrastructure, real property, premises, facility, and I was going to ask, I mean, if you sold your spare beds, if you were recycling your furniture in a hotel, that you would have to come under this section. So it sounds, but as you described the section to us just now, you only really referred to the license. So if this is about the license, I think this does need to be changed quite a bit.
And I think we can tighten that up. The concept would be that when you're transferring the license, because under our statutes you can't move the facility somewhere else, you are transferring the license along with the vast majority of the facility that's there. That would be negotiable, I would imagine. Yeah. We can certainly clarify language. It's not our intent to have people come when they're transferring minor pieces of equipment. That's not what we're after. But we are looking for a transfer of control and to give the commission the ability to control that.
But would the thought process be to take a % of the increased value of the entire transaction when a license is sold?
No, just the value of the license itself,
license.
not the property that is transferred with it. That's how I read the statute.
Well, but there is, depending on how the license is valued, or rather the goodwill of the operation is valued, some of that value could be apportioned to the license itself. So, which is what you're getting at.
Part of what I was getting at, yeah.
So, I think these, and I haven't read them with this in mind, I haven't read them in detail with this in mind, but how would we go about valuing both the license, or is there a third-party provision that would value the license, or it's also given our approval? Is that the control mechanism for that valuation?
We don't have a third-party evaluation process in this particular regulation. We do have the ability to have the IEB investigate. We could have financial analysis done through the IEB on it if we chose to. We can also ask for additional information, so we could have consultants come in and look at it if we wanted to as well.
This one's puzzled me from the very beginning in the law, and I think, so I think we got to do a lot of work trying to figure out what this says and how this would operate. A couple of minor things. On the first page, section B refers to an interest utilized in a gaming establishment, and C refers to utilized in operating a licensed gaming establishment, as if there's a difference between the two, but I don't think there is. And then why would, or maybe this is in the statute, why would we not want to be able to approve the transfer of interest to a bona fide financial institution?
I think that is in our statute within certain percentages.
So if Countrywide wanted to buy a casino, we wouldn't have the right to approve that transfer?
Well, if they wanted to buy the entire casino, yes, you would. But if the casino was giving a mortgage to someone, for example, say a purchase money mortgage for equipment or furniture, you may not want to approve that.
Okay, well, again, I don't think that's what this says. I think this says if it's traded, if it's sold, if the transfer is to a financial institution, it is not covered under these regs.
We'll look at that against the statute.
Okay. Well, good luck with this one, because this one's complicated.
Which, I mean, I'm sorry to try to, perhaps this is oversimplification, but I think because of that, the number to pick is 50%. Ultimately, it's going to be up to what somebody's willing to pay,
But 50% of what?
of whatever that purchase price is.
So you're talking
whatever
about
that
not just the
appreciation.
license, you're talking about everything?
No, the license, the license.
Just the license.
Yeah. Now, we have to look at how everything is valued, including the goodwill. I would put all of the goodwill into the license, but maybe we could do a little bit more thinking or research about that. And there's third parties that could value the real property and and everything else, and all the debt that would be offsetting. Anyway.
Well, we'll just have to, I can't imagine how you would, if somebody comes in and buys the MGM facility, it includes the license, and the casinos, and the hotels, and everything else, I can't imagine how you would ascribe which portion of that total purchase price was for the license versus everything else. How would you do that?
There's process. It's in the accounting world. It's the goodwill. It's the brand. It's the excess between the real property valued. There's ways to value them, and whatever else was the premium paid or not paid on top of that.
Okay. Well.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see how you get that value. I mean, we started off with a license fee that just a set figure. It's not based on a market value.
Yes.
Not based on what?
It's not based on a market value.
No,
start
it's totally arbitrary.
Okay, but then
we
got $1 billion. We got somebody to propose, 1.6 billion of, in one market, 800 million in another. That depends on all the other factors.
Okay. Well, we'll discuss this more. Let's invite lots of public comment on this one so we can get some help. Okay.
And the reference to Countrywide was, of course, just
hypothetical.
Extremely.
I picked up on that too.
To try to make my point.
Right.
The next regulation we have, I believe, is the licensee reporting regulation, Loretta?
Employees, vendors, junket enterprises.
That is really subsumed for purposes of our conversation today in what we're doing with the internal controls regulation. Some triggers in the internal controls relate there, and I think it'd be easier to think about this if we started right in on the internal controls.
You're talking about 134?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so before we do internal controls, maybe we'll do the hearing, and then we can devote the balance of the time to the internal controls, because they're a little more complicated. So you have before you what is really an amendment to the hearing regulation, section 101. We had amended it previously to streamline it and make it a little bit easier to understand. This amendment at this point is to create a process. What we have learned over our racing hearing structure is that there are some better ways for us to hold hearings, and we want to make sure that we put a process in place on the gaming side that allows for what we know will be potential hearings on things like gaming licenses and employee licenses and things like that. So what this hearing regulation does is it states specifically when we're going to follow the formal rules or the informal rules under section 801 CMR. We leave the formal rules for adjudicatory proceedings and things like suitability. We have the informal rules for other types of hearings. We clarify who has standing to appeal, because that has sometimes been a little vague in our former regulation, but we've created clarity around who can appeal, and it's generally applicants or licensees that can appeal. We allow for the appointment of a hearing officer, and this is new for us. It's not new on the racing side, where we have a hearing officer who hears almost all of the appeals and then has a further appeal to the commission. On the gaming side, we will now be able to have a hearing officer who will take the initial hearings and render a decision that then can be appealed up to the commission. We talk about time frames for filing an appeal to the commission. We have now a set 30-day time frame where if there's an appeal from the hearing officer's decision, that's when you have to file to the commission. We create standard of proof. We have a clear and convincing standard when it comes to suitability. We've incorporated a substantial evidence standard for other things, with the exception of certain key items that are found in our statute and require a higher standard.
Catherine, I'm sorry, which section are you looking?
It's 101.
101.
101,
Okay.
yep.
Adjudicatory proceedings.
Yes.
Okay, sorry.
And then finally, we define the commissioner's review of the hearing officer's decision. So the commissioner reviews the hearing officer's decision on the record. We have provisions in there that track the 801 CMR provisions that say if the commission chooses not to review it, the hearing officer's decision can become final. So what we're doing is we're beefing up this section to be prepared to have a hearing process for the hearings that we anticipate will come.
Anybody? Commissioner McHugh? No. Look good to me. Thank you.
Okay. Internal controls.
Good afternoon, Commissioners.
Good afternoon.
As you know, the internal controls are essentially the policies and procedures that govern the core gaming, accounting, financial functions, as well as a number of other functions that happen in a gaming establishment. Chapter 23K, Section 25D require that each gaming licensee submit their system of internal controls to the Commission for approval prior to commencing gaming operations. It also requires the Commission to set forth regulations outlining the information that has to be included within those controls, and these regulations before you are our effort to outline that information. Efforts have been made to afford a gaming licensee as much discretion to oversee their operations as possible, though as you'll see in a number of areas we have set forth prescriptive elements that we have suggested must be included within certain policies and procedures to ensure a number of things, including the uniformity amongst all of the licensees and their systems of controls. We have actually circulated an earlier version of this draft, which is largely the same as the one before you today, to each of the designated gaming licensees as well as the actual gaming licensee for their comments, and we would certainly look forward to what they have to say about the direction this is taking. And we thought it important, of course, given the complexity of this topic, to bring it before you at this juncture to ensure that you are comfortable with the direction that these regulations are moving at this point. So with that, we thought perhaps today we would give you a broad overview of the draft that's before you. Certainly happy to answer any questions and address any concerns. With that, I would just note that we've collaboratively put this draft together. So Loretta and Bruce can certainly answer questions within the different areas here.
Tom, excuse me, let me just ask a question. Did you have an opportunity to have the 2-on-2 meetings with Commissioner Stebbins and Zuniga?
As well as Commissioner Cameron. We met with Commissioner Zuniga individually.
Because in that case, we've all heard it. I wonder whether we could rather just have us comment on raise our questions rather than have you go through the briefing a second time.
That's fine.
Does that make sense to you? Yeah, okay. So if you have other introductory remarks, fine, but otherwise, why don't we just open it up and let the commissioners, starting at the beginning, just raise whatever questions we've got.
Great.
All right. I'll start on page 29. On 138, 2A, this is really minor. This is only to prove that I actually read these things. 2A, next to last line, it says, of the casino games department, and such person shall have the authority of a casino manager. I assume you mean gaming manager.
I'm sorry, I'm like, 138, you got it right there.
Right here.
Okay. Yes.
Anybody else? On 30 and 31, we talked about this a little bit, but I just wanted to say it again. There's this incredible specificity about you can manage this many Pai Gow tables and one box person for each craps table and so forth. Where do those standards come from? How do we know?
It's been a standard used in the industry for at least the 30 some odd years that I've worked in it. Pai Gow tile tables are handled differently, basically because your risk of somebody cheating is higher, so you wouldn't want to have the person supervising those tables have 2 or 3 more that they would have to add to that list, because somebody that was inclined to cheat the game would just go to the one that was getting the least attention. But these are kind of the standards that have been used since 1978 that I'm aware of.
Well, in the normal world, that's never a good answer. This is the way we've always done it. It's never a good answer. Is one thing you talked about when you were talking to Commissioner McHugh and me was that there's something about standardization. It's much easier to detect inappropriate actions if the viewer is seeing the same standardized operation. It's easy to detect diversions from that. But is there does the fact that it's been done for 30 years suggest that there's reason to believe that that is the right number?
No, I think what you learn from that 30 years is that having a big 6-wheel is much easier to supervise than a Pai Gow tile table or a craps table. So therefore, it's easier for somebody to take 6 blackjack tables and stuff because there isn't constant action, and probably not as high a risk for the casino to have less supervision on that. Where you get a Pai Gow tile table, you're looking at some big money, and there's a lot of cheating that is attempted on those tables. So I don't think it's the time period. I think it's what's learned over that time period.
So there is some reason to think that 8 poker tables, if the poker shift supervisor is supervising only poker tables, really is somehow demonstrably better than either 7 or 9 or 10?
You could probably argue for 9 tables or that. I think what when we did this, I was looking at what would be reasonable for somebody to supervise and be able to be attentive to in a working environment.
I obviously have no independent knowledge about this whatsoever. But as we talked about with Commissioner McHugh, the prescriptive nature of this is just prima facie notable, and it's worth thinking. And I'll be interested in what our licensees have to say. Are there other alternative ways to approach this? Well, we know there are, but I'll be interested in hearing the discussion. Anybody else got issues? On page 34, the patron signature file, so this is when you decide to check somebody's identification, you will, in the process of checking, you will get these 4 data points, or 6 data points, name, address, signature, and so forth, and then you will create a file on that person?
In your credit file, you would have that, and that's what would be compared in the PID if somebody's taking a marker or counter check to see that that information matches up. It's a way of...
So you would go into this file when you get credit?
Yes.
Okay. And
you would actually create the file when you get credit, and it would be checked when you request to withdraw on that.
Okay. Got it.
Can I mention something to the prior point, which, I, like the chairman had an initial, shall I say, concern relative to the prescriptive nature. I kept thinking about internal controls on a financial standpoint, but I arrived at really appreciating the notion that when it comes to the operations, standardization and prescription is probably a better way to go.
When it comes to what?
Operations, like how many people you're going to have supervising pie-out tables as opposed to blackjack tables. Because the operator could have the incentive, a perverse incentive, to save money or on shifts, etc., that could detract from the integrity of the game, which is our main role. So prescribing the number of people around, a lot of these procedures relative to the operations, I think is very important. Something done in many other jurisdictions for those reasons, not for the reasons in a vacuum, but.
Right. Yeah, and it's just, since
In the reg, too, to address that, in slower periods, there's procedures here to reduce staffing levels, which, let's say, from 3 in the morning to 6, you might have like 3 or 4 people sitting at various tables. That certainly is a lot easier to supervise than when you have full play on all the tables. So we, do accommodate that in the regulation.
Right. Commissioner Cameron's not here, so I can raise issues of philosophy, but Commissioner Stebbins has made this point time after time after time about how different we treat the casino industry, and how if anybody else wanted to come to town and offer 3,000 jobs and be like 6, we'd be crawling all over ourselves to give away tax credits and so forth. But we know this is but I still that sort of gnaws at me a little bit, this degree of, just this incredible degree of oversight, but I get it, I think. On page 49, we discussed this a little bit. I didn't really get it, but the 138.25, this does apply to Plain Ridge, or does not?
It does.
Well, I think we need to clarify that point. I think it probably does not, if you read some of the definitions very carefully.
Right.
In that Plain Ridge has at the moment, a racing license under 128A. So I think we need to reconcile some of our internal definitions. But These simulcasting regulations are certainly one we need to clarify who they apply to and who they don't.
When you do mean them to apply to Plainridge.
Well, initially, that was the intent.
Yeah. Okay.
But at this point, the question has been raised.
Okay. I think I just had one other one. On the linked slot machines on page 85. This, on page 86, section 1, seems to be setting up the standards by which there are the special intervention by gaming staff to, I guess, make sure that the machines are working properly and so forth. And it's anytime there's a jackpot over 75,000 or a manual jackpot. What's a manual jackpot?
It's one that the machine wouldn't pay. A manual would be a hand-paid jackpot.
You mean if the machine says you get X amount of money, but you have to go to the booth to get it? Oh,
yes.
okay. Where there is evidence of a malfunction, notify the IEB that a jackpot has been registered, permit the IEB to inspect slot machine, progressive, or related equipment involved in that failure. There's just it sounds like if you win anything over 75,000, you're gonna have to come in and have the machine checked, I guess.
It would be the IB agent on site, and he would just come to make sure that the proper chips in the machine, the outside of the cabinet hasn't been tampered with. It's just more of an assurance that it's not a setup jackpot or anything like that. It does not delay the payout at all because the casino checks those chips and things as well for a jackpot in that denomination.
But if there's a manual jackpot of $600,
it's still it says a manual jackpot of 75,000, I believe.
No, it just says any manual jackpot where there's evidence.
That needs to be clarified then. That wasn't the intent of that. It was supposed to be the larger
Any
amount.
manual jackpot where there is evidence of a malfunction.
Yes.
Anyway, I think you need to read this. I don't think this language scans.
Okay.
I think you've got it. It doesn't make sense the way it's written. Okay, now I understand what a manual jackpot is. So, isn't 138.57 alternative procedures for manual slot jackpots? It seems like it's really alternative procedures for lesser payouts, not alternative procedures for manual slot jackpots. Because there's any definition. Again, I can just let you guys look at this, I guess, but this is not a procedure which applies to any manual jackpot. It's only a procedure which applies to lesser payouts.
I believe it's basically really more saying that, if you want to come forward with different procedures for doing these jackpots, that we'll review it to make sure for that it would meet the requirements for being accountable.
But you've got certain standards for ones that are over 75,000.
Yes.
And I think it sounds like you're saying under some number, maybe it's 75,000, I don't know what it is, there are different standards that we can create. We can create different policies and procedures. But the variable isn't whether it's a manual slot jackpot or not, it's amount of how much the payout is.
Yeah.
So I think this is mislabeled and,
Okay.
and therefore very confusing.
Got it.
That's all I have. Anybody else have?
Not at this time.
Not at this time, yeah.
I just had one quick question or point, and we talked about it the other day when we did the sessions with no more than 2 commissioners. Going to page 19, which is the vacancy issue with respect to a chief executive officer position or a chief gaming executive. I mean, we're talking about these being mandatory departments for the operation of the casino. It would seem to me that some of this language needs to be consolidated. I mean, I can't expect our licensee would go on for several days or even a month without somebody filling that position. That you get into that 30-day window and then 5 days after you fill it, they got to let us know. I mean, it seems some of those timelines could be tightened up.
Yeah,
There just seem to be multiple
historically,
reporting levels.
we have had issues with that in a few properties. I can't say that it's happened in modern days, but it's no problem to tighten that timeline up.
I mean, I can't imagine one of our licensees would let one of these positions go vacant for very long. It can't be somebody who apparently is also a department supervisor someplace else. It's not like losing a bar back, you're losing somebody who's got major responsibilities. And, you know, I think the timelines could be something that we could be alerted to a lot faster.
If I could touch on the licensing notification, because it's a separate subject on the agenda. I deferred speaking about it because I thought it would come up now, and it hasn't, so I just want to make sure that we cover that. On page 20 of your internal controls, there are 2 regs that require the licensee to have a system for, 1, ensuring that employees are properly licensed and registered, and 2, for ensuring that vendors are properly licensed and registered. These requirements would trigger some reporting requirements that are in your packet as amendments to 134, the licensing reg. I do have some question whether that is the right place for them, but the language in your packet that's now under 134 is the proposed language that would trigger reporting provisions that would require the gaming licensee to report updates on employees to the commission, as well as report on a regular basis the dollar disbursements between the licensee and any vendors, so that the licensing division could monitor when a vendor is reaching the threshold amounts that would trigger the gaming vendor secondary, so that those that licensing and background process could be done in a timely manner. So those were the licensing matters that are on the agenda.
Okay. Anything else from you folks?
No, this represents a lot of highly detailed and thoughtful work, and this is the beginning of the comment period, and we'll all have an additional time to look at it and think about it and reflect on the comments we get back. But it's a really painstaking job, and this is well done. The internal control regs really help us understand what's going on in the casino, and are valuable to educational as an educational tool as well as a regulatory tool. So I look forward to the continued and further discussion of these as we go forward with the licensing process, and thank the legal staff and regulatory staff for the input. It's really very, very, very useful stuff.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree. Are we also putting the transfer and licensing regs for public comment at this time? Or is this, like we've done in the past, just the first presentation for feedback?
This is a first recitation. We can put them out for informal public comment, sure. We'd probably want to make some revisions based upon the conversations we had today, but
Yeah,
we
let's do
can
that.
start to solicit informal comments, and we
Right.
can start with the licensees if we haven't already.
Right.
But you would come back to us again and say, these are the ones we want to put out for public comment, right?
Yes, that's
And-
right.
And do you have a timetable for that, so that those of us who have been delinquent in making comments can remedy the delinquency?
No names.
I would not propose the next meeting, because the next meeting we have different regulations for final approval
Right.
for you, so probably the meeting after,
Right.
which would take it out about a month.
Right, okay.
Good.
Anything else? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.